She believed her new job would be just another step in her career, until she crossed paths with the most feared CEO in the company. All it took was one disastrous encounter, a spilled coffee, and a single deep glance for something to begin shifting between them. He, always cold, controlling, and unreachable, seemed inexplicably affected by every small gesture she made. And she, without realizing it, changed the atmosphere around her with her sweet, light, and spontaneous nature. What no one knew was that this accident would be only the beginning of an intense story filled with tension, secrets, and a desire impossible to ignore. The silver tray trembled in Emma Richardson's hands as she navigated the marble corridors of Blackstone Industries' executive floor. Her reflection caught in the polished surfaces surrounding her. A 26-year-old woman, with shoulder-length auburn hair hastily pinned back, wearing a cream-colored blouse that had seemed professional that morning, but now felt woefully inadequate among the intimidating grandeur of London's most prestigious financial district. It was her first week as personal assistant to Alexander Blackstone, and every day felt like walking through a minefield blindfolded. The man was a legend, not the good kind. At 34, he had transformed his family's modest investment firm into a global powerhouse, earning a reputation as ruthless, demanding, and utterly unforgiving. The previous 3 assistants had lasted a combined total of 6 weeks. "You'll do fine," she whispered to herself, the same mantra she'd been repeating since Monday. "It's just coffee. How hard can it be?" The boardroom doors loomed ahead, mahogany giants that seemed to mock her inexperience. Through the frosted glass, she could see shadows of the morning meeting already in progress. Her instructions had been crystal clear. Enter at precisely 9:15 with coffee service for 8 executives. No exceptions, no delays. Emma checked her watch. 9:14. Perfect timing. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and reached for the door handle with her free hand. The tray wobbled slightly, just enough to send a ripple through the carefully arranged porcelain cups. "Steady," she murmured, regaining control. The door swung open with surprising force, as if someone had pulled it from the other side. Emma stepped forward confidently, only to collide directly with a wall of expensive fabric and masculine cologne. If this story is touching your heart, show your support. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. Every action helps us keep bringing you new stories full of emotion. Time slowed to a cruel crawl as the tray tilted beyond recovery. 8 cups of steaming coffee launched themselves through the air in a perfect arc of impending disaster. The scalding liquid found its target with unerring precision, the crisp white shirt of Alexander Blackstone himself. The crash of porcelain hitting marble echoed through the suddenly silent boardroom like a death knell. Emma watched in horror as dark brown stains spread across what was undoubtedly a shirt, worth more than her monthly salary. Coffee dripped steadily onto his perfectly polished shoes, creating a growing puddle that reflected the horrified faces of 7 executives. Alexander Blackstone stood completely still, his 6'2" frame rigid with what Emma could only assume was barely contained fury. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the chaos, his angular jawline set in a way that suggested imminent doom for anyone responsible. When his steel-grey eyes finally met hers, Emma felt her soul leave her body. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry, I didn't—" The door— "What an absolute disaster!" The sharp voice of Victoria Sterling, Blackstone Industries' executive director, cut through Emma's stammering apology like a blade. The older woman rose from her chair, her silver hair pulled back in a severe chignon that matched her expression. "How can someone so clumsy work on this floor? This is utterly unacceptable." Emma felt heat flood her cheeks as every person in the room stared at her with varying degrees of shock and disdain. She knelt quickly, trying to gather the broken porcelain pieces with shaking hands. "She doesn't belong here," Victoria continued, her voice growing shriller with each word. "Clearly she lacks even basic coordination. How did human resources approve such incompetence?" "I can clean this up," Emma said desperately, her voice cracking with embarrassment. "I have napkins in my desk, and I can call maintenance." "You've done quite enough damage already," Victoria snapped. "Perhaps serving coffee is beyond your skill set. Maybe you should consider a career change." The boardroom fell into that particular kind of silence that precedes either violence or volcanic eruption. Emma remained crouched on the floor, surrounded by coffee-stained debris, waiting for the inevitable termination that would surely follow. Then Alexander Blackstone spoke. Enough. The single word carried such quiet authority that Victoria's mouth snapped shut mid-sentence. Alexander's voice was low, controlled, but there was something beneath the surface, a dangerous undercurrent that made even the most senior executives shift uncomfortably in their chairs. He moved with deliberate precision, stepping carefully around the puddle without acknowledging the stains on his shirt. Emma risked a glance upward and found him towering over her, his expression unreadable. "The meeting is concluded," he announced, his gaze never leaving Emma's face. "Everyone out." "But Alexander, we haven't finished discussing the Morrison account," Victoria began. "Everyone out now." The steel in his voice brooked no argument. Victoria's face flushed red, but she gathered her files and marched toward the door with the rest of the executives trailing behind her. The click of designer heels on marble faded into the distance, leaving Emma alone with the man whose career she had just potentially ruined. She remained on her knees, surrounded by porcelain shards and her own mortification, waiting for the axe to fall. This was it, 1 week of employment, finished by a moment of cosmic clumsiness. Alexander crouched down beside her, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large man. Up close, she could see details that the company newsletter photos had never captured. The slight scar above his left eyebrow, the way his dark lashes framed those intimidating grey eyes, the faint scent of sandalwood that somehow survived the coffee assault. "Accidents happen," he said quietly, his voice completely different from the commanding tone he'd used with the executives. There was something almost gentle in those steel-grey eyes as he looked at her. "Are you hurt?" Emma blinked, certain she'd misheard. What?" "Your hands," he clarified, nodding toward where she clutched several porcelain pieces. "Are you cut?" She looked down, surprised to find her hands were indeed trembling, but miraculously uninjured. "No, I don't think so." He stood and extended his hand toward her. For a moment, Emma simply stared at it. Strong, elegant fingers attached to a man who should have been firing her on the spot. "Come on," he said, the corner of his mouth lifting in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Let's get you up before you find more creative ways to redecorate my boardroom." Despite everything, Emma felt an unexpected bubble of laughter rise in her throat. She accepted his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. The contact was brief, but sent an odd little jolt through her system. Probably just residual shock from the disaster, she reasoned. "I really am sorry," she said, gesturing helplessly at his ruined shirt. "This is my first week and I wanted to make a good impression, but clearly you've made an unforgettable one," he interrupted. And this time there was definitely amusement in his voice. "I'll have someone from maintenance clean up the mess. As for my shirt..." He glanced down at the coffee stains with what looked suspiciously like resignation rather than anger. "I keep spare clothes in my office." Hazards of the job. Emma stared at him, wondering if she'd fallen into an alternate dimension where Alexander Blackstone was reasonable and understanding. "You're not firing me. For having poor timing with a door?" "Hardly." He turned toward his chair, gathering his files with efficient movements. "However, I do suggest we work on your disaster management skills. Tomorrow, perhaps try knocking." "Tomorrow?" Emma's voice came out as a squeak. "I still have a job tomorrow?" Alexander paused in his gathering, fixing her with a look that was both intense and oddly protective. "Miss Richardson, in the 3 days you've worked here, you've managed to organize my disaster of a filing system, schedule appointments with military precision, and handle Victoria's passive-aggressive phone calls with more grace than my last 3 assistants combined. A little spilled coffee doesn't erase competence." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, relief mixed with gratitude, and something else she couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Mr. Blackstone. I promise this won't happen again." "See that it doesn't," he said, but his tone held no real threat. "And Miss Richardson?" "Yes, sir?" "Next time Victoria decides to hold an impromptu character assassination, feel free to remind her that personnel decisions are my responsibility, not hers." He walked toward the door, pausing just long enough to add, "Oh, and the coffee was actually quite good. Shame about the delivery method." With that, Alexander Blackstone left Emma standing in the ruins of her first major workplace disaster, wondering how the most feared CEO in London had just become the most intriguing man she'd ever met. Outside in the corridor, she could hear Victoria's voice rising in indignant conversation with other executives, no doubt planning alternative strategies to remove the incompetent new assistant. But for the first time since starting this job, Emma felt like maybe, just maybe, she might survive working for Alexander Blackstone after all, even if it killed her nerves in the process. 3 days after the coffee catastrophe, Emma had developed a survival routine that she hoped would prevent future disasters. She arrived at Blackstone Industries every morning at 7:30 sharp, a full hour before Alexander's first appointment, giving herself time to organize his schedule, review important documents, and most importantly, practice walking to the boardroom without incident. This particular Tuesday morning found her humming softly to herself as she arranged the day's contracts on his desk. The melody was something her grandmother used to sing, a sweet, lilting tune that always made Emma feel calm and centered. She discovered that a little music helped settle her nerves before facing another day of working for London's most intimidating CEO. "The Morrison account needs reviewing by 10, she sang under her breath, spinning gracefully between the filing cabinets and his mahogany desk. Client meeting at 11:30 and lunch with the investors from Madrid. She did a little twirl, her floral skirt swishing around her knees as she placed documents in perfect alignment. The humming grew slightly louder as she worked, her voice carrying the gentle warmth that had made her the star of her university choir. She was so absorbed in her musical organization that she didn't hear the private elevator announce Alexander's early arrival. "Could you work in silence?" Emma nearly jumped out of her skin, spinning around to find Alexander Blackstone standing in the doorway of his office, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her car. His expression was carefully neutral, but there was something in his steel-grey eyes that looked almost strained. "Oh, Mr. Blackstone, I'm so sorry." Emma's cheeks flamed red as she realized she'd been caught singing at work like some sort of Disney princess. "I didn't know you were here. I'll be quiet, I promise." "Thank you," he said curtly, moving past her to his desk without making eye contact. "I prefer to begin my day without musical accompaniment." Emma bit her lip, mortified. Of course, the most serious man in London wouldn't appreciate her cheerful morning routine. She gathered the remaining files and retreated to her desk outside his office, determined to maintain absolute silence for the rest of the day. But as the morning progressed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Alexander's demeanor. Through his glass office walls, she could see him sitting rigidly at his desk, his jaw tense, fingers drumming an agitated rhythm on the mahogany surface. He kept glancing toward her desk, then looking away quickly when their eyes met. When he emerged for his 10 o'clock meeting, his usual commanding presence seemed slightly depleted, not enough for anyone else to notice, but Emma had spent enough time studying his moods to recognize the subtle signs of tension. The next morning, she arrived determined to maintain complete silence. No humming, no singing, just efficient, quiet productivity. She organized his schedule in absolute stillness, arranged his coffee service without a sound, and settled at her desk to begin the day's correspondence. But 20 minutes into Alexander's morning routine, something felt wrong. Through his office windows, she could see him sitting at his desk, but instead of his usual focused intensity, he kept shifting in his chair, looking toward her desk with an expression she couldn't quite read. His fingers drummed that same agitated rhythm, and twice she caught him opening his mouth as if to say something, then closing it again. By lunch, his mood had darkened considerably. He snapped at a junior executive during a conference call, cancelled an afternoon meeting without explanation, and somehow managed to make his already intimidating presence even more formidable. Emma couldn't understand it. She'd followed his request for silence perfectly. So why did he seem more stressed than ever? The pattern continued for the rest of the week. Silent Emma, agitated Alexander. She began to wonder if her presence itself was the problem. Perhaps he simply wasn't suited to having an assistant at all. Friday morning brought an unexpected revelation. Emma had been battling a terrible cold for 2 days, her throat so scratchy and raw that humming was physically impossible. She arrived at her usual time, moving sluggishly through her morning routine in complete congested silence. Alexander emerged from his office at 8:15, looking absolutely terrible. His usually perfect hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there were faint shadows under his eyes that suggested a sleepless night. He stood in the doorway between their offices, studying her with an intensity that made Emma squirm. "Are you quite all right, Miss Richardson?" he asked, his voice carrying an odd note of concern. Emma looked up from her computer, surprised by the question. "Just a cold, sir. Nothing serious." Her voice came out as a raspy whisper, making her wince. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, a flicker of what almost looked like disappointment, though that made no sense whatsoever. "Perhaps you should take the day off," he suggested, but there was a reluctant quality to the offer, as if he hoped she'd refuse. "Oh no, I'm fine to work," Emma assured him quickly. "I wouldn't want to fall behind on the Carlisle presentation." "Very well," he said, but continued hovering in the doorway as if he wanted to say something else. The morning dragged on in uncomfortable silence. Alexander seemed even more restless than usual, emerging from his office 3 times to ask unnecessary questions about his schedule. Each time, he lingered at Emma's desk longer than necessary, his eyes searching her face with an expression she couldn't decipher. Around 11, Emma's phone rang with a call from Human Resources. As she spoke in her raspy whisper, she noticed Alexander had stopped pretending to review documents and was openly listening to her conversation. "Yes, I'll have those reports to you by Monday," she croaked into the phone, then dissolved into a fit of coughing that made her eyes water. The moment she hung up, Alexander appeared at her desk with a steaming cup of tea and a concerned frown. "Honey and lemon," he said, setting the cup down in front of her. "For your throat." Emma stared at the offering, then up at him. In all her weeks of employment, Alexander Blackstone had never brought her so much as a paperclip. "Thank you, sir." "That's very thoughtful. I can't have my assistant sounding like a broken whistle during client calls," he said brusquely, but there was something almost tender in the way he watched her take the first sip. As the warm liquid soothed her throat, Emma felt brave enough to ask the question that had been bothering her all week. "Mr. Blackstone, have I done something wrong? You've seemed different this week, more tense than usual." Alexander's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "Your work has been perfectly adequate, Miss Richardson. But," she pressed gently. He studied her face for a long moment, his grey eyes revealing nothing. "But nothing. Return to your duties." With that dismissal, he retreated to his office, leaving Emma more confused than ever. She sipped the tea he'd prepared and tried to focus on her work, but she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important she was missing. It wasn't until the following Monday, when she arrived humming her grandmother's song with a fully recovered voice, that she finally understood. She was barely 3 notes into the familiar melody when Alexander's office door flew open. "There you are," he said, relief flooding his features before he could stop it. Emma froze mid-hum, staring at him in astonishment. "Sir?" He cleared his throat, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Your vocal recovery appears complete." "My vocal recovery," Emma repeated slowly, pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. "Yes, you sound better." He shifted uncomfortably, clearly regretting his revealing response. Emma set down the file she'd been carrying and studied the man before her with new eyes. The tension that had plagued him all week was already beginning to ease from his shoulders. His fingers had stopped their agitated drumming, and unless she was very much mistaken, there was the faintest hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Mr. Blackstone," she said carefully, "do you like it when I hum in the mornings?" The question hung between them like a challenge. Alexander's jaw worked silently for several seconds, and Emma could practically see him weighing the cost of honesty against his carefully maintained professional distance. Finally, he spoke. "I find that certain sounds help me concentrate." It was the most diplomatic way possible of admitting that her cheerful morning melodies had somehow become essential to his daily routine. Emma felt a warm glow spread through her chest, not entirely professional, but undeniably pleasant. "Would you like me to continue the musical mornings?" she asked, trying to keep her voice light and professional, despite the strange intimacy of the conversation. "If you find it aids your productivity," he said carefully, "then I see no reason to discourage the practice." Which was, Emma realized with a growing smile, Alexander Blackstone's elaborate way of saying, Please, for the love of all that's holy, never stop singing in the mornings again. I'll make note of that, she said solemnly. For productivity purposes, of course. Of course, he agreed, and this time there was no mistaking the smile that tugged at his lips. As he returned to his office, Emma resumed her humming with renewed enthusiasm. Through the glass walls, she watched Alexander settle into his chair with visible relief, his shoulders finally relaxing as her voice filled the quiet space between them. She was beginning to suspect that working for Alexander Blackstone was going to be far more interesting than she'd ever imagined. 2 weeks into what Emma privately called the humming détente, she had settled into a comfortable rhythm with Alexander Blackstone. Their mornings began with her cheerful melodies filling the executive suite while he pretended not to listen from behind his office door. It was a delicate dance of professional distance and unspoken understanding that worked surprisingly well. Until the morning, everything changed. Emma was arranging files on Alexander's desk when she noticed a rebellious piece of lint clinging stubbornly to the shoulder of his navy blazer. He was standing near the window, reviewing a contract with the focused intensity that made him such a formidable businessman, completely unaware of the tiny white speck that marred his otherwise perfect appearance. Without thinking, which she would later realize was becoming a dangerous habit around her boss, Emma approached him. "Permit me," she murmured, reaching toward his shoulder. The moment her fingers brushed the fabric near his chest, Alexander went absolutely rigid. Not the controlled stillness of a man maintaining professional composure, but the frozen shock of someone who had just received an unexpected electric current. Emma felt it too, a jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with static electricity and everything to do with the suddenly intimate space between them. Her fingers trembled slightly as she plucked the lint away, but instead of stepping back immediately, she found herself looking up into his face. His steel-gray eyes had darkened to the color of storm clouds, and his breathing had changed, shallow, controlled, as if he were holding himself back from something. They stood frozen in that bubble of unexpected intimacy, her hand still hovering near his chest, his gaze locked on her face with an intensity that made her knees feel unsteady. "There," she whispered, her voice coming out far softer than she'd intended. "All perfect again." Neither of them moved. Emma became acutely aware of everything. The expensive scent of his cologne, the way his jaw tensed and relaxed, the fact that she could probably count his eyelashes from this distance if she weren't so distracted by the way he was looking at her. "Miss Richardson," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "Yes, sir?" For a moment, she thought he might say something important, something that would explain the electricity crackling between them or the way her heart was racing. Instead, he stepped back carefully, his professional mask sliding back into place like armor. "Thank you," he said formally. "That was, attentive of you." The spell broken, Emma retreated to her desk, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. She'd just touched her boss, actually put her hands on him, and he'd probably been too polite to tell her how inappropriate it was. But as the day progressed, something had shifted between them. Alexander found reasons to emerge from his office more frequently, asking questions about his schedule that he could have easily answered himself. And each time he approached her desk, Emma noticed his eyes would linger on her face just a moment longer than necessary. The next morning she arrived to find him adjusting his tie in front of the window, muttering something under his breath about the knot being crooked. Emma bit her lip, torn between the desire to help and the memory of yesterday's awkward encounter. "Having trouble with that?" she asked tentatively. Alexander turned, and Emma could see that his usually perfect Windsor knot was indeed slightly askew. "I seem to have lost my touch this morning," he admitted, with what might have been the tiniest hint of frustration. "I could," Emma began, then stopped herself. "I mean, if you'd like, I could help fix it. My father never could manage a proper tie knot, so I learned early." Alexander stood perfectly still for a moment, considering her offer. "If you wouldn't mind," he said finally. Emma approached him with careful professionalism, trying to ignore the way her pulse quickened as she reached for his tie. But the moment her fingers touched the silk fabric, she realized her mistake. To properly adjust a tie knot, she needed to be close, very close. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body as she worked, could hear the subtle change in his breathing. Her movements were efficient and practiced, but she was hyper-aware of every accidental brush of her knuckles against his shirt, every small intake of breath when she tugged the fabric tighter. "There," she said softly, smoothing the silk against his chest and stepping back to admire her handiwork. "Much better." "Thank you," Alexander said, but his voice had taken on that rough quality again. "Very capable hands." The compliment sent an unexpected thrill through Emma, though she tried to maintain her professional demeanor. "Years of practice with my father and 3 younger brothers. I'm practically a tie-straightening expert." "I'll keep that in mind," he said, and there was something in his tone that suggested he definitely would. Over the following days, Emma began to notice a peculiar pattern. Alexander's usually impeccable appearance seemed to require more maintenance than before. A collar that needed straightening here, a pocket square that had gone slightly askew there. Each small imperfection provided an opportunity for Emma to step close, to touch him briefly and professionally, while they both pretended it was perfectly normal. But nothing felt normal about it. Every contact sent sparks through her system, and she was becoming increasingly certain that Alexander felt it too. She could see it in the way his jaw tightened when her fingers brushed his lapel, the way his breathing changed when she reached up to smooth his hair back into place. The breakthrough came on a Thursday morning when Alexander emerged from his office looking more disheveled than she'd ever seen him. His tie was not just crooked but practically sideways. His hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt cuff. "Rough morning?" Emma asked gently. "Conference call with Tokyo at 5 a.m., he explained, running a hand through his already messy hair. "I'm afraid I wasn't entirely awake during the grooming process." Emma studied him with growing concern. The man who never appeared in public with so much as a wrinkle was standing before her, looking almost vulnerable. It was endearing in a way that made her chest feel tight. "Come here," she said, standing and moving toward him. "Let me help." This time there was no hesitation. Alexander submitted to her ministrations like a man surrendering to inevitable fate. Emma worked carefully, straightening his tie with gentle efficiency, smoothing his shirt collar, reaching up to comb his dark hair back into its usual perfect style with her fingers. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly as she fussed over him. "I know," Emma replied, her fingers still threading through his hair. "But I want to." The admission surprised them both. Emma's hands stilled in his hair as she realized what she'd just confessed, that touching him, caring for him, had moved beyond professional courtesy into something dangerously personal. Alexander's eyes met hers, and this time he didn't look away. "Emma," he said, and the way he spoke her name, soft, almost reverent, made her breath catch. "Yes, what are we doing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. It was a loaded question, full of implications that neither of them were quite ready to examine. Emma's hands were still resting lightly on his shoulders, and she could feel the tension thrumming through his muscles. "I don't know," she admitted honestly, "but I don't want to stop." Something shifted in Alexander's expression, surprise, relief, and something else that made Emma's heart race. His hands came up to cover hers where they rested on his shoulders, his fingers warm and sure. "We should probably discuss this," he said, but he made no move to step away from her. "Probably," Emma agreed, but she didn't pull her hands away either. They stood like that for a long moment, caught in a bubble of possibility and uncertainty. Then Alexander's phone rang, shattering the moment like glass. He stepped back reluctantly, his hands falling away from hers as he reached for the phone. "Blackstone." Emma retreated to her desk, her heart still racing from their almost confession. As Alexander handled his phone call with his usual professional efficiency, she tried to process what had just happened between them. Whatever it was, there was no going back now. The careful professional distance they'd maintained had been thoroughly shattered, replaced by something infinitely more complicated and dangerous. And despite the potential catastrophe waiting in the wings, Emma couldn't bring herself to regret it. Not when the memory of Alexander saying her name like a prayer was still sending shivers down her spine. As she watched him through the glass walls of his office, she noticed something that made her smile. Despite having taken the phone call, despite returning to his usual commanding demeanor, he kept reaching up to touch his tie, the tie she had straightened with her own hands. Perhaps she wasn't the only one struggling to forget their moment of unexpected intimacy. Emma's newfound awareness of Alexander's reactions to her touch led to an unexpected discovery. The man who commanded boardrooms with unwavering confidence was surprisingly susceptible to genuine compliments. It started innocently enough. On a Monday morning, as Alexander emerged from his office wearing a charcoal suit that made his grey eyes look almost silver, Emma glanced up from her computer and said without thinking, "That's a wonderful colour on you. It makes your eyes look extraordinary." Alexander paused mid-stride, his hand freezing on his coffee cup. For a moment he looked almost stunned, as if no one had ever complimented his appearance before, which, Emma realized, was probably true. Men like Alexander Blackstone were told they were powerful, brilliant, intimidating, but rarely that they looked handsome. "Thank you," he said, his voice carrying a note of surprise. "I appreciate that." Emma smiled and returned to her work, missing the way Alexander glanced down at his suit with what looked suspiciously like satisfaction. 2 days later, he wore the same charcoal suit again. This wasn't entirely unusual. Alexander had several similar suits, but something about the coincidence made Emma pay attention. "You're wearing the grey again," she observed, as she handed him his morning correspondence. "Excellent choice. It really is your colour." This time Alexander's reaction was more controlled, but Emma caught the way his shoulders straightened slightly at her words. "It's a practical colour," he said, but there was something pleased in his voice that contradicted the dismissive words. "Practical and devastating," Emma replied with a grin. "Poor clients won't know what hit them." She could have sworn she saw Alexander's mouth twitch toward a smile before he caught himself. The pattern became more obvious over the following week. After Emma casually mentioned that she loved the navy tie he wore on Tuesday, "It brings out the blue undertones in your eyes. Very sophisticated." The tie appeared again on Friday. When she complimented a particular white shirt for making him look crisp and commanding, it became part of his regular rotation. But it was the day she complimented his black shirt that Emma realized the full extent of her inadvertent influence. Alexander had arrived that morning wearing a perfectly fitted black dress shirt instead of his usual white or light blue. The color transformed him from merely handsome to absolutely devastating, the dark fabric emphasizing his strong shoulders and making his grey eyes look like storm clouds. "Good heavens," Emma breathed, looking up from her filing. "That black shirt should be illegal. You look—" She paused, realizing she was about to say something highly unprofessional. "I look what?" Alexander prompted, and there was something in his voice that suggested he genuinely wanted to know. Emma felt her cheeks warm, but decided to be honest. "Dangerous, in the best possible way." Alexander went very still, his eyes darkening as they met hers. "Dangerous? Like a character from a romance novel," Emma explained, immediately wishing she could take the words back. "I mean, professionally dangerous, to the competition, because you look so commanding." She was babbling now, but Alexander didn't seem to mind. If anything, he looked fascinated by her flustered response. "A romance novel character," he repeated thoughtfully. "That's not a comparison I've heard before." "Forget I said anything," Emma said quickly, burying herself in paperwork to hide her embarrassment. "I have no filter in the mornings." "On the contrary," Alexander said, his voice taking on that rough quality she was beginning to recognize. "I find your morning observations quite illuminating." When Emma finally gathered courage to look up, Alexander was studying her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. There was something almost predatory about the way he watched her, not threatening but intensely focused, like a man who had just discovered something important. The next week brought a revelation that made Emma question everything she thought she understood about professional boundaries. Alexander had begun wearing black shirts with startling frequency. Monday black, Wednesday black, Friday black with a charcoal tie that made Emma temporarily forget how to type properly. It took her embarrassingly long to connect the dots. "Alexander," she said during one of their morning routine adjustments. His pocket square had mysteriously gone askew. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." He stood perfectly still as she smoothed the silk square back into place, his breathing carefully controlled. "Have you changed your wardrobe recently?" His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "In what way?" "You're wearing a lot more dark colors." "Black, specifically." Emma stepped back to survey her handiwork, trying to keep her voice casual. "Not that I'm complaining. It's very flattering." "Is it?" Alexander asked, and there was something almost vulnerable in the question. Emma looked up at him, taking in the way the black fabric stretched across his broad shoulders, the way it made his dark hair look even richer, the way it turned his grey eyes into something magnetic and dangerous. "It's devastating," she admitted honestly. "Utterly devastating." Alexander's eyes darkened, and for a moment, Emma thought he might say something important. Instead, he cleared his throat and stepped back into professional distance. "I'll keep that in mind," he said formally. But Emma wasn't fooled by his controlled response. She'd seen the flash of satisfaction in his eyes, the way he'd unconsciously straightened at her compliment. Alexander Blackstone, London's most feared CEO, was choosing his clothes based on her casual observations. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. That afternoon, as Emma organized his schedule for the following week, she found herself facing an ethical dilemma. If Alexander was unconsciously, or perhaps not so unconsciously, seeking her approval through his wardrobe choices, what did that mean? Was she inadvertently manipulating her boss, or was he inadvertently revealing something deeper about his feelings? The thought was interrupted by Alexander emerging from his office, jacket in hand, looking uncharacteristically ruffled. "Is everything all right?" Emma asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Client dinner tonight," he explained, running a hand through his hair. "The Worthington account, they're particular about appearances." Emma studied him, noting the way he kept adjusting his tie, the unusual uncertainty in his demeanor. This was a man who never doubted his ability to command any room, yet he seemed genuinely nervous about making the right impression. "You look perfect," she said gently. "Absolutely perfect. They'd be fools not to see how capable and trustworthy you are." Alexander paused, his hands stilling on his tie. "Do you think so?" The question was asked so quietly, with such genuine uncertainty, that Emma felt her heart clench. This powerful, intimidating man was actually seeking reassurance from her, not about business strategy or financial projections, but about something as simple as whether he looked presentable. "I know so," Emma said firmly. "You're wearing their trust color. That navy brings out your natural authority. Your tie is perfectly straight, your shoes are polished to mirror brightness, and your confidence is showing in every line of your posture. They'll take one look at you and know they're dealing with the best." Alexander's entire demeanor shifted at her words. His shoulders squared, his jaw relaxed, and something like relief flickered across his features. "Thank you," he said, and there was a weight to the words that went far beyond gratitude for a simple compliment. "Any time," Emma replied, meaning it more than she probably should. As Alexander left for his dinner meeting, Emma remained at her desk, ostensibly finishing the day's correspondence, but actually thinking about the man who had just walked out the door. Somewhere along the way, their professional relationship had shifted into something far more personal. She was no longer just managing his schedule, she was apparently managing his confidence, his comfort, possibly even his happiness. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a warm sense of purpose she'd never experienced in any other job. When Alexander returned the next morning wearing another devastating black shirt, Emma smiled and said nothing, but she caught the way he glanced at her, waiting for her reaction, and the satisfied expression that crossed his features when she gave him an approving nod. Whatever was happening between them, they were both active participants now. The question was whether either of them had the courage to acknowledge it out loud. The first sign that Alexander Blackstone had developed a possessive streak appeared on a Tuesday morning in the form of James Mitchell from marketing. Emma was at the copy machine, humming her usual morning melody while organizing client presentations, when James approached with what he clearly considered his most charming smile. He was attractive in a conventional way. Sandy hair, blue eyes, the kind of easy confidence that came from never being turned down. "Emma, isn't it?" he said, leaning against the machine with practiced casualness. "I've been meaning to introduce myself properly. James Mitchell, Senior Marketing Director." "Nice to meet you officially," Emma replied politely, continuing to sort her papers. "Though I think we've passed in the corridors a few times." "Indeed we have. And each time I've thought what a crime it is that we haven't had a proper conversation." James's smile widened. "You bring such positive energy to this floor. It's refreshing." Emma glanced up, noting the way his eyes lingered on her figure with unmistakable appreciation. "That's very kind of you to say." "I was wondering," James continued, moving closer. "If you'd like to grab coffee sometime. I know this lovely little cafe near Covent Garden. Very intimate, perfect for getting to know each other better." From her peripheral vision, Emma noticed movement in Alexander's office. Through the glass walls, she could see him standing at his window, ostensibly reviewing documents, but clearly watching the exchange with focused intensity. "That's a lovely offer," Emma began diplomatically, "but I'm quite busy with—" "Nonsense," James interrupted with the confidence of a man unaccustomed to rejection. "Everyone needs a break. Besides, I think we could have quite a lot of fun together." He moved even closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a seductive whisper. "I have a feeling you're not as innocent as you look." Emma felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment and irritation. "Mr. Mitchell, I really don't think— Is there a problem here?" The voice cut through the air like a blade. Alexander had materialized beside them with the silent efficiency of a predator, his presence immediately changing the entire dynamic of the conversation. He stood just close enough to Emma that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, his grey eyes fixed on James with arctic intensity. "Mr. Blackstone," James straightened quickly, his smooth confidence faltering. "No problem at all. Just getting acquainted with your lovely assistant." "How thoughtful," Alexander replied, his tone pleasant enough to fool someone who didn't know him well. Emma, however, could hear the steel beneath the silk. "I trust the introduction has been concluded?" "Actually, I was just asking Emma if she'd like to—" "Miss Richardson's schedule is completely booked for the foreseeable future," Alexander interrupted smoothly. "Aren't you, Miss Richardson?" Emma looked up at him, noting the tension in his jaw, the protective way he'd positioned himself slightly in front of her. "Extremely booked," she confirmed, playing along despite her confusion about his sudden intervention. "Such dedication," Alexander observed, his eyes never leaving James's face. "It's why Miss Richardson is so invaluable to the executive team. I'm sure you understand how protective we are of our most essential personnel." The word protective carried unmistakable warning, and James was intelligent enough to recognize it. "Of course, well, perhaps another time, Emma, when your schedule isn't so demanding." "Perhaps," Emma replied noncommittally. James retreated with as much dignity as he could muster, but Emma noticed the way Alexander watched him until he was completely out of sight. Only then did the tension in his shoulders begin to ease. "Thank you," Emma said quietly. He was being rather persistent. "Was he bothering you?" Alexander asked, and there was something dangerous in his voice that made Emma look at him more carefully. "Not bothering exactly, just overly familiar for a first conversation." Alexander's jaw tightened further. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, I want to know immediately. I can handle myself, you know," Emma said gently, touched by his concern, but not wanting him to think she was helpless. "I know you can," Alexander replied, his voice softening. "That doesn't mean you should have to." The protective note in his voice sent an unexpected thrill through Emma. She was used to taking care of herself, had been doing so since she was 18. Having someone, especially someone as powerful as Alexander, willing to step in on her behalf was both startling and oddly comforting. 3 days later, Emma discovered just how seriously Alexander took his self-appointed role as her protector. She was reviewing quarterly reports when her phone rang. "Emma Richardson, Mr. Blackstone's office." "Emma, this is Jennifer from Human Resources. I have some interesting news about James Mitchell from marketing." Emma glanced toward Alexander's office, noting that he was on his own phone call. "Oh? He's been transferred to our Edinburgh office effective immediately. Quite sudden, really. Apparently there were some strategic needs that required his particular expertise up north." Emma's pen stilled in her hand. "Edinburgh? But didn't he just get promoted here in London?" "Yes, that's what makes it so unusual. But Mr. Blackstone himself requested the transfer. Something about James being perfect for expanding our Scottish operations." Jennifer's voice carried a note of gossip-hungry curiosity. "Rumour has it the position comes with a significant raise and a company flat. Lucky fellow, really." Emma hung up the phone and stared at Alexander's office, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Alexander was still on his call, gesturing emphatically at something on his computer screen, the picture of professional concentration. When he finally emerged 20 minutes later, Emma was waiting with raised eyebrows and crossed arms. "Something wrong?" he asked innocently. "James Mitchell has been transferred to Edinburgh." Has he? How fortunate for our Scottish expansion plans. Alexander, Emma said, using his first name deliberately, did you transfer James because he asked me for coffee? Alexander's step faltered slightly, but his expression remained carefully neutral. I don't know what you mean. You absolutely know what I mean. You can't just relocate people to other cities because they show interest in me. I can, if I believe their skills would be better utilized elsewhere, Alexander replied smoothly. But Emma caught the hint of defensiveness in his voice. His skills in what? Long-distance flirtation? Strategic market development, Alexander said firmly, though the corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been suppressed amusement. Emma studied his face, noting the way he was trying very hard not to look guilty. This is completely inappropriate professional behavior. Is it? Alexander challenged, moving closer. Because I seem to recall you looking rather uncomfortable during his strategic market development attempts. That's not the point, Emma protested, though she had to admit she wasn't entirely upset about James's departure. You can't just rearrange the entire company whenever someone shows interest in me. Can't I? Alexander asked, and there was something in his voice, something possessive and intense that made Emma's breath catch. They stared at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Emma realized she was waiting for Alexander to deny it, to claim it was purely coincidental, to maintain the professional distance they'd been carefully pretending still existed. Instead, he said quietly, "Would you prefer I hadn't?" The question hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them were quite ready to examine fully. Emma found herself thinking about James's overly familiar tone, his assumption that she would welcome his advances, the uncomfortable way he'd looked at her. No, she admitted softly, I wouldn't prefer that. Something shifted in Alexander's expression, relief, satisfaction, and something darker that made Emma's pulse quicken. Good, he said simply, because I have no intention of stopping. With that declaration, he returned to his office, leaving Emma standing in the hallway with her heart racing and her professional sensibilities in complete chaos. She should have been outraged. She should have marched into his office and demanded he stop manipulating personnel decisions based on his personal feelings. She should have reminded him about professional boundaries and appropriate workplace behavior. Instead, she found herself thinking about the way his voice had roughened when he'd said, I have no intention of stopping, and the possessive heat in his grey eyes when he'd looked at her. Emma returned to her desk with the unsettling realization that Alexander Blackstone's jealousy wasn't just unprofessional, it was also surprisingly, devastatingly attractive, and that was probably the most dangerous development yet. Emma discovered that jealousy was a terrible, consuming thing exactly 1 week after the James Mitchell incident. The revelation came in the form of Sophia Pemberton, heiress to a pharmaceutical fortune and owner of legs that seemed to go on for approximately 3 miles. Mr. Blackstone is expecting me, Sophia announced, sweeping into the executive suite like she owned it. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled in a way that had probably cost more than Emma's monthly salary, and her designer dress clung to curves that belonged in a fashion magazine. Emma glanced at Alexander's schedule, finding no appointment listed. I don't show any meeting scheduled for today, Miss Pemberton, Sophia Pemberton. She said it as if Emma should recognize the name, which, annoyingly, she did. The Pemberton family was practically royalty in certain London circles. Alexander and I have a standing arrangement. He'll want to see me. Before Emma could respond, Alexander's office door opened. Sophia, he said, and Emma felt something cold settle in her stomach at the warmth in his voice. I wasn't expecting you today. I was in the neighborhood and thought we might have lunch, Sophia purred, moving toward him with fluid grace. Unless you're too busy with, she glanced dismissively at Emma, administrative matters. Emma watched in horror as Sophia rose on her tiptoes to kiss Alexander's cheek, her perfectly manicured hand resting on his chest with obvious familiarity. The gesture was clearly intimate, speaking of a relationship that went far beyond business. How lovely, Emma managed through gritted teeth, her fingers clenching around her pen hard enough to leave marks. Miss Richardson, could you clear my lunch schedule? Alexander asked, and Emma noted with growing dismay that he didn't step away from Sophia's touch. Sophia and I have quite a bit to catch up on. Of course, Emma replied with professional politeness that felt like swallowing glass. "Shall I make reservations somewhere particular?" "That little place near the Thames," Sophia suggested, her hand still resting possessively on Alexander's arm. "You remember, darling, where we had that wonderful evening last month?" Darling. She'd called him darling and he hadn't corrected her. Emma felt her professional smile become brittle. "I'll call immediately." As Alexander retreated to his office to gather his things, Sophia turned her attention to Emma, with the kind of calculating look that suggested she'd noticed far more than she'd initially let on. "You're new," Sophia observed, settling into the chair across from Emma's desk with elegant precision. "Relatively," Emma confirmed, trying to keep her voice neutral. "How interesting. Alexander usually prefers his assistants to be less conspicuous." Sophia's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "But I suppose he needed someone young and energetic for all those late nights at the office." The implication was clear and deliberately cruel. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to maintain professional composure. "Mr. Blackstone is very dedicated to his work." "Oh, I'm sure he is. He's always been quite thorough in his attention to detail." Sophia's voice carried innuendo that made Emma want to throw something breakable at her perfectly styled head. Fortunately, Alexander emerged from his office before Emma could do anything irreversibly unprofessional. "Ready?" he asked Sophia, offering his arm with the kind of easy gallantry that suggested long practice. "Always," Sophia replied, allowing him to escort her toward the elevator with obvious satisfaction. Emma watched them leave, noting the way Sophia leaned into Alexander's side, the way her laughter echoed through the corridor, the way Alexander seemed genuinely pleased by her company. By the time the elevator doors closed, Emma felt like she might be physically sick. She spent the next 2 hours accomplishing absolutely nothing productive. Every time she tried to focus on correspondence, her mind would drift to images of Alexander and Sophia having an intimate lunch, reminiscing about their wonderful evening and whatever other shared experiences they obviously enjoyed. When Alexander returned at 3 o'clock, slightly windblown and looking more relaxed than Emma had seen him in weeks, her professional facade finally cracked. "How was lunch?" she asked with forced brightness. "Pleasant," Alexander replied, loosening his tie with unconscious sensuality that only increased Emma's irritation. "Sophia's good company. We've known each other for years." "So I gathered. She seems very fond of you." Something in Emma's tone must have caught Alexander's attention, because he paused in sorting through his messages to study her face. "Is something wrong?" "Not at all," Emma lied smoothly. "Why would anything be wrong? You seem different, tense." Emma forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Just tired. It's been a busy day." Alexander continued watching her with those perceptive grey eyes that missed nothing. "Emma." "I should get these reports finished," Emma interrupted, turning back to her computer with deliberate focus. "The Morrison account review is due tomorrow." She could feel Alexander hovering behind her desk, clearly wanting to say something more, but eventually he retreated to his office. Through the glass walls, Emma caught him glancing at her several times, his expression thoughtful and slightly concerned. The breaking point came when Sophia called an hour later. "Blackstone Industries, Alexander Blackstone's office," Emma answered with professional courtesy that required significant effort. "Oh, hello again. Could you put me through to Alexander? This is Sophia Pemberton." "Of course, one moment, please." Emma transferred the call and tried very hard not to listen to Alexander's side of the conversation. She failed miserably. "Sophia, yes, I enjoyed it too. Tonight? I'm not sure. Well, if you insist." "Very well, 8 o'clock. I'll see you there." When Alexander hung up, Emma stared at her computer screen with such intensity that she was surprised it didn't catch fire. Another evening, another intimate dinner, another opportunity for Sophia to run her perfectly manicured hands all over Alexander, while Emma sat at home with takeaway Chinese and romantic comedies that would only make her feel worse. "Miss Richardson?" Emma looked up to find Alexander standing beside her desk, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir? I'll be leaving early today. Could you reschedule my 5 o'clock with the Carlyle group?" "Another dinner with Miss Pemberton?" Emma asked before she could stop herself. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. "Yes, actually. How did you—" "Lucky guess," Emma muttered, making notes with unnecessary force. "I'll handle the rescheduling." "Emma," Alexander's voice was softer now, concerned. "What's bothering you?" The gentle question was her undoing. All the jealousy and confusion and hurt she'd been struggling to contain came rushing to the surface. "Nothing's bothering me," she said, her voice tight with suppressed emotion. "Why should I be bothered by your personal life? It's absolutely none of my business who you have dinner with, or how often you see them, or whether they call you darling and touch you like they own you. I'm just your assistant. I arrange your schedule and organize your files and make sure your ties are straight. That's all." The words tumbled out before Emma could stop them, revealing far more than she'd intended. She realized she was standing now, her hands clenched at her sides, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and anger. Alexander stared at her in stunned silence, his grey eyes wide with something that looked like shock mixed with dawning understanding. "Emma," he said quietly, "are you jealous?" The direct question hung between them like a challenge. Emma felt her carefully constructed professional facade crumble completely. "Yes," she admitted miserably. "Yes, I'm jealous, and I hate it. I hate that she can touch you whenever she wants and call you pet names and take you to intimate dinners while I have to pretend I don't care. I hate that I have feelings for my boss that are completely inappropriate and unprofessional and probably unwelcome. And I especially hate that I'm standing here confessing all of this like some pathetic schoolgirl with a crush." She sank back into her chair, burying her face in her hands. "Please forget I said any of that. I'll completely understand if you want to transfer me to another department or just fire me outright." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sounds of London traffic and Emma's mortified breathing. She was preparing herself for the inevitable awkward conversation about professional boundaries when she felt warm hands gently pull hers away from her face. Alexander had crouched down beside her chair, bringing them to eye level. His expression was soft, almost tender, and completely at odds with the stern CEO facade she was used to seeing. "Emma," he said, his voice rough with something that might have been emotion, "those feelings aren't unwelcome." Emma blinked at him, certain she'd misheard. "What? Sophia is an old family friend. Her father and mine did business together for years. She's been trying to rekindle something that ended long ago, but I'm not interested." Alexander's hands were still holding hers, his thumbs stroking gently over her knuckles. "I haven't been interested in anyone in a very long time. Until you." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Until me?" "Until you," he confirmed, his grey eyes intense with sincerity. "Until a woman who hums in the morning and straightens my ties and makes me actually look forward to coming to work. Until someone who can make me laugh without even trying, and who challenges me without being intimidated by me." "But you were so friendly with her," Emma protested weakly. "I was being polite. There's a difference." Alexander's mouth curved in a slight smile. "Though I have to admit, I had no idea my politeness would provoke such a passionate response from you." Emma felt her cheeks burn. "I wasn't passionate, I was professional." "You were adorably jealous," Alexander corrected, his smile widening. "And it was the most encouraging thing that's happened to me in months." "Encouraging?" "It means you care," he said simply. "It means these feelings I've been struggling with might not be as one-sided as I thought." Emma stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "For you've been struggling with feelings every single day," Alexander admitted, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Every time you touch me to fix my tie or straighten my jacket, every time you smile at me like I'm not the intimidating bastard everyone thinks I am, every time you hum in the morning and make this entire place feel less like a battlefield and more like home." The confession hung between them, raw and honest and completely life-changing. Emma realized she was crying, not sad tears but overwhelmed, relieved, impossibly happy tears. "So," she said through her tears, "what happens now?" Alexander reached up to wipe a tear from her cheek with gentle fingers. "Now I cancel dinner with Sophia and take you somewhere that actually matters if you'd like that." "I'd like that very much," Emma whispered. "Good," Alexander said, standing and pulling her up with him. "Because I've been wanting to do this properly for weeks." "Do what properly?" Instead of answering, Alexander cupped her face in his hands and leaned down until they were breathing the same air. "Ask you out on a real date. tell you how I feel. Stop pretending that what's happening between us is purely professional." Emma's heart was racing so fast she felt dizzy. "And what exactly is happening between us?" Alexander's smile was soft and devastating and full of promise. "Something wonderful, I hope." With that, he pressed the gentlest kiss to her forehead, a promise of more to come, and Emma realized that jealousy might be terrible and consuming, but it was also apparently an excellent catalyst for life-changing confessions. Alexander Blackstone had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, faced down hostile takeovers, and commanded boardrooms full of the most powerful people in London without breaking a sweat. But planning a first date with Emma Richardson was proving to be the most challenging task of his professional life. "Cancel the reservation at Le Bernardin," he told Emma for the third time that Friday afternoon. "Too formal. She'll think I'm trying to intimidate her." Emma looked up from her computer, where she was ostensibly working on correspondence, but actually watching Alexander pace his office like a caged panther. Ever since their emotional confession 2 days earlier, he'd been treating her with a fascinating combination of newfound tenderness and complete neurotic anxiety. "The restaurant is lovely," she called through his open door. "I'm sure she'll appreciate the thought you put into it." "You don't understand," Alexander said, appearing in her doorway with his hair slightly mussed from running his hands through it. "This has to be perfect. I don't get second chances at this." Emma bit back a smile. Seeing the usually unflappable Alexander Blackstone reduced to a nervous wreck over their dinner plans was both endearing and hilarious. "Why don't you tell me what you have in mind, and I'll help you figure it out?" Alexander slumped against her desk with uncharacteristic defeat. "I want somewhere we can actually talk without pretending to be professional, somewhere comfortable but not casual, romantic but not overwhelming." He paused, looking almost vulnerable. "I want her to see that I'm more than just her intimidating boss." "For what it's worth," Emma said gently, "she already sees that." Alexander's grey eyes met hers, searching. "Does she?" "She does," Emma confirmed, her heart clenching at the uncertainty in his voice. "Trust me on this." 3 hours later, Emma found herself standing in front of her wardrobe in a state of panic that rivaled Alexander's earlier meltdown. What did one wear to dinner with one's boss-turned-romantic interest? Too formal would seem like she was trying too hard. Too casual might suggest she wasn't taking this seriously. Too revealing would send entirely the wrong message. After rejecting half her closet, Emma finally settled on a soft emerald dress that brought out the green flecks in her eyes. It was elegant, but not overdone, flattering, but not obvious. She paired it with simple jewelry and her favorite low heels, shoes she could actually walk in without risking another catastrophic collision. When Alexander knocked on her door at 7 o'clock sharp, Emma's first thought was that he looked absolutely devastating. He'd abandoned his usual business attire in favor of dark jeans and a navy sweater that emphasized his broad shoulders and made his grey eyes look like storm clouds. His hair was less severely styled than usual, giving him a more approachable appearance that made Emma's pulse quicken. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice slightly rough with sincerity. "Thank you," Emma replied, then took in his casual attire with surprise. "You look different, wonderfully different." Alexander's mouth quirked in a self-conscious smile. "I thought it might be nice to look like a normal person for once. Someone you might actually want to have dinner with rather than file reports for." "I always want to have dinner with you," Emma said without thinking, then blushed at her own boldness. Alexander's smile widened. "Good to know. Shall we?" Instead of his usual sleek Bentley with a professional driver, Alexander had brought what appeared to be a vintage Aston Martin that he was clearly driving himself. "Another departure from the usual," Emma observed as he opened her door with old-fashioned gallantry. "I thought we could use some privacy," Alexander explained, his cheeks actually coloring slightly. "No chauffeur to pretend we're maintaining professional distance in front of." As they drove through London's evening traffic, Emma discovered that Alexander Blackstone was apparently incapable of normal small talk when he was nervous. Instead of discussing the weather or current events, he launched into what could only be described as a stream of consciousness, rambling about his restaurant choice. "The place we're going is small," he said, taking a corner with the kind of precision that suggested he actually enjoyed driving. "Family-owned. The chef trained in Tuscany, but incorporates modern British influences. They have an excellent wine list, but if you prefer cocktails, they make everything fresh." The atmosphere is intimate, but not overly romantic. I mean, it's romantic, but not in a way that might make you uncomfortable if you decide you don't want this to be romantic, which I hope you do. But I understand if— Alexander, Emma interrupted gently, placing her hand on his arm. Breathe. He glanced at her, his expression sheepish. I'm babbling, aren't I? Adorably, Emma confirmed. It's nice to know you get nervous too. I don't get nervous, Alexander protested automatically. No? Then why have you adjusted your rearview mirror 3 times in the last 5 minutes? Alexander's hand stilled on the steering wheel. I was ensuring optimal visibility. Uh-huh. Emma grinned at him. And the way you've been drumming your fingers on the steering wheel, also for optimal visibility? That's a driving technique. You're a terrible liar when you're flustered, Emma observed, delighting in this glimpse of vulnerability from the man who usually controlled every situation with effortless authority. I'm not flustered, Alexander said, then immediately proved himself wrong by missing the turn to the restaurant and having to circle back. By the time they arrived at Romano's, a charming little Italian place tucked away in a quiet Kensington mews, Alexander had relaxed enough to laugh at himself. This evening is not going according to plan, he admitted as they waited for their table. What was the plan? Impress you with my sophistication and charm. Demonstrate that I'm more than capable of handling a simple dinner date. Convince you that dating your boss isn't a completely terrible idea. Emma studied his face, noting the genuine concern beneath his self-deprecating humor. Alexander, you don't need to convince me of anything. I already know you're sophisticated and charming. I already think dating you is a wonderful idea. And honestly, seeing you nervous and human is far more attractive than watching you command a boardroom. Alexander's expression softened. Really? Really? Though I have to admit, watching you command a boardroom is also pretty attractive. That earned her a genuine smile. Not the controlled professional expression she was used to seeing, but something warm and unguarded that made her stomach flutter. Dinner at Romano's turned out to be a revelation. Away from the formal atmosphere of Blackstone Industries, Alexander transformed from intimidating CEO into something much more appealing, a man who was intelligent without being condescending, funny without trying too hard, and surprisingly thoughtful about everything from politics to poetry. I have a confession, he said over dessert, his fingers playing with the stem of his wineglass. I've been reading romance novels. Emma nearly choked on her tiramisu. I'm sorry, what? After you mentioned I looked like a romance novel character in that black shirt, I got curious. I wanted to understand the reference. Alexander's cheeks had taken on a faint pink tinge that was absolutely endearing. I may have purchased several highly recommended titles. This is the best thing I've heard all week, Emma said, grinning widely. What did you think? They're educational, Alexander admitted, though I have some concerns about the protagonist's approach to workplace safety. Emma burst out laughing. Workplace safety? The number of times characters engage in intimate activities in structurally unsound locations is alarming. Against walls, on desks, in supply closets. It's an HR nightmare waiting to happen. Oh my God, you analyzed romance novels from a health and safety perspective. I analyze everything from a business perspective. It's a compulsion. Alexander's smile was self-aware and charming. Though I did appreciate the attention to emotional development, very thorough character arcs. Emma was laughing so hard, she had tears in her eyes. I can't believe you approached romance novels like a quarterly report. I made notes, Alexander admitted, looking slightly embarrassed but pleased by her reaction. Of course you did. What kind of notes? Comparative analysis of male protagonists' emotional accessibility, effectiveness of various romantic gestures, success rates of different communication strategies during relationship conflicts. Emma stared at him in delighted disbelief. You made spreadsheets about romance novels. One spreadsheet, very small, mostly bullet points. This is simultaneously the nerdiest and most romantic thing anyone has ever told me. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his grey eyes intense. Did it work? The research, I mean? What do you think? I think, Alexander said, his voice dropping to that rough, intimate tone that made Emma's pulse quicken, that I'd like to conduct some practical field research. What kind of field research? Emma asked, though her breathless tone suggested she already knew. The kind that involves taking you home and kissing you properly, if you're amenable to participating in the experiment. Emma's heart was racing now, her skin warm with anticipation. I think I'd be very amenable to that kind of research. Alexander signaled for the check with the kind of efficiency that suggested he'd suddenly developed a pressing schedule to maintain. As they drove back to Emma's flat, the comfortable conversation of dinner gave way to a tension that was electric and expectant. Emma found herself stealing glances at Alexander's profile, noting the way his jaw had tightened, the focused intensity with which he navigated the familiar London streets. "Emma," he said quietly, as they pulled up outside her building. "Yes? I want you to know that this, whatever this is between us, it's not just about physical attraction. You're—" He paused, searching for words with uncharacteristic difficulty. "You make me want to be better, softer, more human." Emma felt her heart clench with affection for this complicated, powerful man who was trying so hard to do everything right. "You already are those things. You just don't let most people see it." Alexander turned to face her fully, his grey eyes searching her face in the dim light from the street lamps. "What have you done to me, Emma Richardson?" "Nothing you didn't want," she replied softly. "Everything I wanted," he corrected, reaching over to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. "Everything I was afraid to want." The tender gesture, combined with the raw honesty in his voice, made Emma's breath catch. This was it, the moment when everything would change between them, when they would cross the line from professional relationship into something infinitely more complicated and precious. "Come upstairs," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander's eyes darkened. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." And as Alexander followed her into her building, Emma realized that some first dates were worth all the nervous anxiety and careful planning in the world. Emma's flat was a study in organized chaos that perfectly reflected its owner's personality. Books were stacked on every available surface, fairy lights draped artfully around the windows, and throw pillows in jewel tones turned her modest sofa into something that looked like a cozy nest. Alexander took it all in with the focused attention he usually reserved for financial reports, as if trying to decode the mysteries of Emma Richardson through her choice in home decor. "It's not much," Emma said, suddenly self-conscious about her humble living space compared to what she imagined Alexander's pristine penthouse must look like. "It's perfect," Alexander replied, his voice carrying a sincerity that made Emma look at him in surprise. "It's warm, welcoming. It feels like you." Emma felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "Would you like some tea? Coffee? I think I have wine somewhere." "Emma." Alexander caught her hand as she bustled toward the kitchen, pulling her gently back toward him. "Slow down. We have time." The simple words, spoken with such gentle authority, made Emma realize she was practically vibrating with nervous energy. Here was Alexander Blackstone, the man she'd been quietly falling for over weeks of morning songs and straightened ties, standing in her living room looking at her like she was something precious. "I'm nervous," she admitted, allowing him to pull her closer until they were standing just inches apart. "So am I," Alexander confessed, his hands settling lightly on her waist. "Terrified, actually." "You?" "Terrified. You face down hostile takeovers before breakfast. Hostile takeovers don't have beautiful eyes and the ability to completely unmake me with a smile," Alexander replied, his thumb stroking gently along her ribcage through the soft fabric of her dress. Emma felt her breath catch at the raw honesty in his voice. "Is that what I do, unmake you?" "Completely," Alexander confirmed, his grey eyes intense as they searched her face. "From the moment you spilled coffee on me, you've been systematically destroying every defense I've spent years building." "I'm sorry?" Emma offered with a slightly hysterical laugh. "Don't be," Alexander said, his voice dropping to that rough, intimate tone that made her knees feel unsteady. "I've never felt more alive than I do when I'm with you." The confession hung between them, heavy with implication and possibility. Emma became acutely aware of everything: the warmth of Alexander's hands on her waist, the way he smelled like expensive cologne and something uniquely male, the fact that they were alone in her flat, with nothing but honest feelings and months of suppressed attraction between them. "Alexander," she whispered, not entirely sure what she was asking for. "Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you." The words tumbled out before Emma could stop them, honest and terrifying and absolutely true. She watched Alexander's expression shift through surprise, relief, and something that looked like wonder. "You think?" he asked softly, his hands tightening slightly on her waist. "I know," Emma corrected, her voice gaining strength. "I know I am. I tried not to because you're my boss and it's complicated and probably a terrible idea, but I can't help it. You're brilliant and kind and surprisingly funny. And when you look at me like you're looking at me right now, I feel like I could conquer the world." Alexander's smile was soft and devastating. "Emma Richardson, you magnificent, brave, impossible woman. Is that good or bad?" "It's perfect," Alexander said, lifting one hand to cup her face with infinite gentleness. "And for the record, I'm not falling in love with you." Emma's heart stopped. "So you're not?" "No," Alexander said, his thumb stroking across her cheekbone. "I've already fallen, completely, irrevocably, probably embarrassingly in love with you. I think it happened the moment you stood in my boardroom covered in coffee and refused to let Victoria Sterling break your spirit." Emma felt tears prick her eyes, happy tears, relieved tears, overwhelmed tears. "Really? Really? I've just been too much of a coward to admit it." "You're not a coward," Emma protested, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under her palms. "You're the bravest man I know. Brave men don't spend weeks agonizing over whether their assistant might return their feelings." "Smart men do," Emma corrected with a smile, "because smart men know that some things are too important to rush." Alexander leaned down until their foreheads were touching, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "And is this too important to rush?" Emma's heart was racing so fast she was surprised it didn't echo through her flat. "Yes," she whispered, "but I don't think I can wait much longer to kiss you." "Good," Alexander murmured, his lips barely an inch from hers, "because I've been thinking about kissing you for weeks, and I'm starting to lose my mind." Emma tilted her face up toward his, her eyes fluttering closed as she waited for the kiss that would change everything between them. She could feel the warmth of Alexander's breath on her lips, could sense him leaning closer. And then her phone rang. Not just any ring, the specific, shrill, impossible-to-ignore ring of her emergency contact number. Alexander jerked back as if he'd been electrocuted, and Emma let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob of frustration. "I'm sorry," she said desperately, reaching for her phone. "It's my emergency line. I have to—" "Emma? Oh, thank God you answered." Her sister's voice was high and panicked. "It's Mum. She's had another episode. We're at St. Mary's Hospital, and the doctors want to speak with family immediately." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. Her mother had been battling severe anxiety and depression for years, with occasional episodes that required hospitalization. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that they want us here tonight. Can you come, please? I know it's late, but I don't think I can handle this alone." Emma looked at Alexander, who had immediately stepped back to give her privacy for the call, his expression shifting from romantic anticipation to concern as he registered the seriousness of her conversation. "Of course," Emma said into the phone. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. She hung up and turned to Alexander with an expression of miserable apology. "I'm so sorry. My mother, she's ill, and my sister needs me at the hospital." "Don't apologize," Alexander said immediately, his CEO authority replacing any trace of romantic disappointment. "What do you need? I can drive you there or call a car service or—" "No, it's fine. I'll take the tube. It's probably faster at this time of night." "Emma." Alexander's voice carried a note of gentle firmness that brooked no argument. "I'm driving you to the hospital. We can discuss everything else later." "You don't have to do that. This isn't your problem." Alexander stepped closer, his hands settling on her shoulders with gentle authority. "Your problems are my problems. That's what happens when you fall in love with someone." The simple declaration, spoken with such quiet certainty, made Emma's eyes fill with tears again. "Alexander." "Go get your coat," he said gently. "We'll talk about this later. Right now your family needs you, and I need to make sure you get to them safely." As Emma gathered her things with trembling hands, she realized that Alexander's immediate shift into protective mode, his assumption that her emergencies were automatically his concern, his complete disregard for his own interrupted evening, was more romantic than any perfect first kiss could have been. During the drive to the hospital, Alexander kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding Emma's, his thumb stroking reassuringly over her knuckles as she explained her mother's condition in a shaky voice. "She's been doing better lately," Emma said, staring out the window at the London streets blurring past. "I thought maybe the new medication was working, but these episodes, they come out of nowhere, and she gets so scared." "How long has she been dealing with this?" Alexander asked gently. "Since my father died 8 years ago. She was never quite the same after that. Some days are good, some days are—" Emma's voice trailed off. "And you've been taking care of her all this time?" It wasn't a question, but Emma nodded anyway. "Me and my sister Sarah, we take turns. It's why I needed this job so badly. The health insurance covers Mum's treatment." Alexander was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "Emma, why didn't you tell me about this before?" "Because it's not professional to burden your boss with personal problems." "I'm not your boss right now," Alexander said firmly. "Right now, I'm the man who loves you, and I want to know about everything that affects you." Emma felt fresh tears threaten. "You really mean that? I really mean that. All of it." When they arrived at the hospital, Alexander parked efficiently and turned to Emma with an expression of gentle determination. "I know you need to go to your family," he said, "but I want you to know that I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as you need me to wait. And when you're ready, when your mother is stable and your sister is okay, I'll still be here." Emma looked at this man who had completely upended her life in the best possible way, who had cancelled his own evening without complaint, driven her across London, and was now offering to spend however many hours it took in a hospital waiting room just to be there for her. "I love you," she said, the words coming out fierce and certain and absolutely true. Alexander's smile was soft and brilliant. "I love you too. Now go take care of your family. I'll be right here when you need me." As Emma hurried into the hospital, she realized that their interrupted kiss might have been frustrating, but the way Alexander had immediately prioritized her needs over their romantic moment was worth 1,000 perfect kisses. Some things, she reflected, were indeed too important to rush, and some men were worth waiting for, no matter how long it took to get the timing right. The waiting room at St. Mary's Hospital had the particular kind of fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly dead, but Alexander Blackstone somehow managed to appear distinguished, even while slouched in an uncomfortable plastic chair at 3 in the morning. Emma found him exactly where he'd promised to be when she emerged from her mother's room 4 hours later, exhausted but relieved. "How is she?" Alexander asked, immediately standing and moving toward Emma with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for crisis management. "Stable. The doctors think it was triggered by a medication interaction. Her GP prescribed something new without checking her full chart." Emma rubbed her eyes, feeling the weight of the evening settling into her bones. "She'll need to stay overnight for observation, but Sarah's with her now." Alexander studied Emma's face with those perceptive grey eyes that missed nothing. "And how are you?" It was such a simple question, but the gentle way he asked it, as if her well-being was the most important thing in the world, made Emma feel like she might cry again. "Tired, worried, grateful that you're here." She looked up at him, taking in the slight wrinkles in his previously pristine shirt, the way his hair had gotten mussed from running his hands through it while he waited. "You didn't have to stay all this time." "Yes, I did," Alexander said simply, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear with infinite gentleness. "Where else would I be?" Emma felt something warm and precious settle in her chest. In her previous relationships, admittedly few and far between, she'd always felt like she was managing crises alone, even when she wasn't technically single. But here was Alexander, treating her family emergency as if it were his own responsibility, his own concern. "Come on," he said, placing a protective hand on the small of her back. "Let me take you home." During the quiet drive back to Emma's flat, she found herself stealing glances at Alexander's profile, studying the strong line of his jaw, the way his capable hands handled the steering wheel with unconscious competence. "I keep thinking I should feel more awkward about this," she said suddenly. "About what?" "About you, about us, about the fact that a few hours ago we were about to kiss for the first time, and now you're driving me home from a family crisis like we've been together for years." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering this. "Do you feel awkward?" "That's just it. I don't. I feel safe, cared for, like this is exactly where you're supposed to be." Emma paused, then added more softly, "Like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." "Good." Alexander said, his voice carrying that rough quality that always made her pulse quicken. Because that's exactly how you're supposed to feel. When they arrived at Emma's building, Alexander walked her to her door with the same old-fashioned gallantry he'd shown earlier in the evening, despite the fact that it was now nearly dawn, and they were both exhausted. "Will you come in?" Emma asked, then quickly added, "Just for tea or coffee. I don't think I can sleep yet and I could use the company." Alexander's smile was soft and understanding. "I'd like that." Inside her flat, Emma moved around the kitchen with automatic efficiency, grateful for the familiar routine of making tea. Alexander settled on her sofa, looking surprisingly at home, among her scattered books and colourful throw pillows. "Your sister seemed lovely," he said as Emma handed him a steaming mug, "though I only met her briefly. Sarah's wonderful. She's been my rock through all of this with Mum." Emma curled up on the other end of the sofa, tucking her feet under her. She was a bit shocked to see me arrive with a man, though, especially one who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. "What did you tell her about me?" "The truth, that you're my boss, who's become something much more important." Emma studied Alexander's face, noting the way he seemed to relax at her words. "She's going to want to meet you properly when things calm down." "I'd like that," Alexander said sincerely. "I want to know the people who matter to you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their tea and processing the emotional intensity of the evening. Emma found herself watching Alexander, marveling at how he seemed to belong in her space, how his presence made her modest, flat feel more complete somehow. "Alexander," she said eventually, "can I ask you something? Anything. Why aren't you married? Or involved with someone like Sophia Pemberton, someone from your world?" Alexander set down his teacup and turned to face her fully, his expression thoughtful. "Do you want the polite answer or the honest one?" "Honest. Always honest." "Because no one from my world has ever looked at me the way you do." Emma felt her breath catch. "How do I look at you?" "Like you see me. Not my bank account, not my company, not my family name, just me." Alexander's voice was quiet, vulnerable in a way she'd never heard before. "Like you actually enjoy my company for who I am, not what I can provide." "Of course I enjoy your company. You're brilliant and funny and surprisingly sweet when you let yourself be." "Sweet?" Alexander's mouth quirked in a self-deprecating smile. "There's a word that's never been applied to me before. Then people haven't been paying attention." Emma set aside her own mug and moved closer to him on the sofa. "You brought me tea when I was sick. You defended me to Victoria Sterling. You spent 4 hours in a hospital waiting room just so I wouldn't have to face a family crisis alone. If that's not sweet, I don't know what is." Alexander reached out to cup her face, his thumb stroking gently across her cheekbone. "You make me want to be better than I am. You already are better than you know." They were close now, closer than they'd been since their interrupted moment hours earlier. Emma could see the exhaustion in Alexander's eyes, but also something deeper, a contentment, a rightness, as if this was exactly where he was meant to be. "Emma," he said softly, his voice rough with emotion and fatigue. "Yes?" "I know this isn't how either of us imagined this evening would go." "No," Emma agreed, her heart beginning to race as she recognized the intent in his voice. "But maybe it's better this way." "Better?" "We've seen each other at our most vulnerable. We've handled a crisis together. We've moved past the first date nerves into something more real." Alexander's smile was slow and devastating. "Something more real," he repeated. "I like that." He leaned forward slowly, giving Emma time to pull away if she wanted to. But she didn't want to pull away. She wanted this moment, this man, this feeling of being exactly where she belonged. When Alexander's lips finally met hers, it was with a gentleness that took her breath away. The kiss was soft, exploratory, full of promise rather than demand. Emma felt herself melting into him, her hands coming up to rest against his chest as he deepened the kiss with careful reverence. When they finally broke apart, both breathing slightly unsteadily, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "Was that worth waiting for?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything with you is worth waiting for," Emma replied, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "But I'm hoping we won't have to wait too much longer for more." Alexander's laugh was low and pleased. "Impatient, are we?" "Thoroughly," Emma admitted without shame. Is that a problem? Not even slightly. Alexander pressed another soft kiss to her lips, then pulled back to study her face. But right now, what you need is sleep. It's been a long night. Emma wanted to protest, wanted to ask him to stay, wanted to explore this new dimension of their relationship. But the concern in Alexander's voice, the way he was already reaching for his jacket with obvious reluctance, reminded her that he was right. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, running on adrenaline and tea. "Will I see you tomorrow?" she asked, following him to the door. "Try to keep me away," Alexander replied, turning to capture her hands in his. "But Emma? Take the day off. Spend time with your mother. Make sure she's really okay. I can handle the office for one day." "Are you sure?" Alexander's smile was soft and full of affection. "I'm sure. Your family comes first. Always." As he leaned down to press a final, lingering kiss to her lips, Emma realized that falling in love with Alexander Blackstone was turning out to be the best decision she'd never consciously made. Some storms, she reflected, as she watched him drive away, brought exactly the right person to shelter you from the wind, and some first kisses were worth waiting through hospital waiting rooms and family crises and interrupted romantic moments, especially when they came with the promise of many more to follow. Emma returned to work the following week with a lightness in her step that had nothing to do with her mother's successful recovery and everything to do with the way Alexander's eyes lit up when she walked through the office doors Monday morning. "How is your mother?" he asked immediately, abandoning his morning correspondence to focus entirely on her response. "Much better, thank you. The doctors adjusted her medications and she's back home with Sarah." Emma settled at her desk, noting the way Alexander lingered in the doorway between their offices, as if reluctant to let her out of his sight. "How did you manage without me?" "Terribly," Alexander admitted with a rueful smile. "I had no idea how much I depend on your organizational skills until I spent Friday trying to find the Morrison contracts." "Where did you look for them?" "Everywhere except the Morrison file, apparently." Emma laughed, delighted by this glimpse of the less-than-perfect side of Alexander Blackstone. "Did you eat anything besides coffee and whatever meetings catered?" Alexander's slight pause told her everything she needed to know. "Alexander," Emma said with gentle exasperation, "you can't live on caffeine and sheer determination." "I can for a few days. I've done it before." "Well, you won't be doing it anymore. Not while I'm around to stop you." The possessive note in her voice seemed to please Alexander immensely. "Is that so?" "That's so. I take care of the people I love." The word love hung between them, warm and certain, and Emma felt a flutter of pleasure at the way Alexander's expression softened with wonder, as if he still couldn't quite believe she actually felt that way about him. Their new dynamic settled into a comfortable rhythm over the following days. Professionally, nothing had changed. Emma still managed his schedule with military precision, still organized his files and handled his correspondence. But personally, everything was different. Alexander found excuses to emerge from his office more frequently, often bringing Emma coffee or asking her opinion on matters that had nothing to do with business. Their conversations were peppered with shared smiles and meaningful looks that would have been completely inappropriate a week earlier, but now felt natural and right. Thursday evening brought an unexpected opportunity to test the strength of their developing relationship. Emma was finishing the quarterly reports when the first rumble of thunder echoed through the office building. She glanced up to see dark clouds gathering outside the panoramic windows, the kind of dramatic London storm that could turn day to night in minutes. "Looks like we're in for quite a weather show," she called to Alexander, who was reviewing contracts at his desk. The response from his office was immediate and alarming, the sound of a chair scraping back violently, followed by the distinctive crash of papers hitting the floor. Emma looked up in concern to find Alexander standing rigidly at his window, his back to her, every line of his body tense with what looked like barely controlled panic. "Alexander!" She stood and moved toward his office, noting the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "Are you all right?" "Fine," he said curtly, but his voice was strained, and he hadn't turned away from the window. "Just checking the weather patterns." Another rumble of thunder, closer this time, and Emma saw Alexander's shoulders jerk as if he'd been struck. That's when she realized what she was witnessing. Alexander Blackstone, the man who faced down corporate raiders without flinching, was terrified of thunderstorms. She approached him slowly, as if he were a skittish animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "Alexander, what can I do to help?" "Nothing," he said, his voice tight. "It's just weather. It'll pass." But even as he spoke, his breathing was becoming shallow and rapid, and Emma could see the way his hands were trembling despite his obvious efforts at control. When the first flash of lightning lit up the office, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that shook the windows, Alexander actually stepped back from the glass, his composure finally cracking completely. "I need to—" he started, then stopped, seeming lost for words. "You need to sit down," Emma said gently, taking his arm and guiding him away from the window toward his leather sofa. "And breathe, and let me help you." Alexander allowed himself to be led, his usual commanding presence completely absent. Emma settled him on the sofa and knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers and noting how cold they were despite the office's warmth. "Look at me," she said softly. "Not the window, not the storm, just me." Alexander's grey eyes met hers, wide with vulnerability and what looked like shame. "This is ridiculous. I'm a grown man who's afraid of a little rain." "It's not ridiculous, and it's not just a little rain," Emma said firmly. "Everyone has fears. Even powerful CEOs are allowed to be human." Another flash of lightning illuminated the office, and Alexander's grip on her hands tightened convulsively. Emma could see him fighting against his instinctive panic, trying to maintain some semblance of control, even as his body betrayed him. "When did this start?" she asked gently, keeping her voice calm and steady. Alexander was quiet for a long moment, his breathing still uneven. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "When I was 8. There was a storm, worse than anything you'd see in London. We were at our country house, and a tree came down on the east wing." He paused, his eyes unfocused as if seeing something far away. "I was in that wing when it happened, trapped for 6 hours before they could dig me out." Emma felt her heart clench with sympathy for the frightened child Alexander had been. "That must have been terrifying." "The sound," Alexander continued, as if he hadn't heard her. "The thunder, the crashing, the way the whole house shook. I thought it was going to come down on top of me." His laugh was bitter and self-deprecating. "Irrational Alexander knows that storms can't hurt me in a modern office building, 40 floors above the ground. But 8-year-old Alexander doesn't care about rational." 8-year-old Alexander had every right to be scared," Emma said fiercely. "And current Alexander has every right to still feel that fear." She shifted position, moving from kneeling in front of him to sitting beside him on the sofa, maintaining contact with his hands while positioning herself between him and the storm-lit windows. "Tell me something," she said, her voice taking on the kind of gentle authority that somehow commanded attention without demanding it. "What's your favorite sound?" Alexander looked at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "Your favorite sound. The one that makes you feel calm and safe and happy." Alexander was quiet for a moment, considering. "Your voice," he said finally. "When you hum in the mornings, it's peaceful." Emma felt her heart melt at the admission. "Then that's what you're going to focus on. Not the thunder, not the lightning, just my voice." She began to hum the same melody that had started their entire relationship, her grandmother's song that had somehow become Alexander's morning comfort. As her voice filled the space between them, Emma watched Alexander's breathing begin to slow, his grip on her hands relaxing slightly. "That's it," she encouraged softly, continuing the gentle melody. "Just listen to me, not the storm." When another flash of lightning lit the office, Alexander still tensed, but he didn't pull away. Instead, he moved closer to Emma, his body seeking her warmth and comfort, in a gesture so trusting and vulnerable that she felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him as he leaned into her embrace. "I'm right here, and you're safe." For the next hour, Emma held Alexander as the storm raged outside, humming softly and stroking his hair, while he gradually relaxed against her. She discovered that Alexander Blackstone, stripped of his commanding facade, was surprisingly fragile, a man who had spent so many years projecting strength that he'd forgotten how to accept comfort. "I can't believe I'm letting you see me like this," he murmured against her shoulder when the worst of the thunder had passed. "Like what? Human? Weak?" Emma pulled back enough to look at him directly, her expression fierce with protection and love. "You are not weak. You're brave enough to let someone care for you, which is the strongest thing anyone can do. Alexander studied her face, seeming to search for any sign of judgment or disgust. Finding none, his expression softened with something that looked like wonder. I love you, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I love you so much, it terrifies me more than any storm ever could. Good, Emma replied, pressing a soft kiss to his forehead. Because I love you just as much, and now I know exactly how to take care of you when you need it. As the storm finally moved on, leaving only gentle rain pattering against the windows, Alexander remained in Emma's arms, neither of them willing to break the intimate bubble of trust and vulnerability they'd created. Emma, Alexander said quietly, Thank you for not making me face that alone. You'll never have to face anything alone again, Emma promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. That's what love is, having someone in your corner no matter what. And as they sat together in the quiet aftermath of the storm, Emma realized that sometimes the most powerful moments in a relationship came not from passion or romance, but from the simple act of being there when someone needed you most. Victoria Sterling had been planning her attack for weeks, and she struck with the precision of a corporate assassin on a Tuesday morning when Alexander was in meetings with international clients. Emma was organizing quarterly reports when Victoria appeared at her desk, like a perfectly coiffed vulture, her silver hair styled in its usual severe chignon, and her expression carrying the kind of cold satisfaction that suggested she'd been looking forward to this moment. Miss Richardson, Victoria said, her voice dripping with false politeness. How fortunate to find you alone. We need to have a conversation. Emma looked up from her filing, immediately on alert. In the weeks since the coffee incident, Victoria had maintained a facade of professional civility, but Emma had caught the calculating looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Of course, Miss Sterling. What can I help you with? Oh, my dear girl, Victoria said, settling uninvited into the chair across from Emma's desk. I think you know exactly what this is about. Emma's stomach clenched with apprehension, but she kept her voice steady. I'm afraid I don't. Your little arrangement with Mr. Blackstone. Victoria's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Did you really think no one would notice? The lingering looks, the way he rushes to your defense, the fact that he stayed in the office until nearly dawn last week? Heat flooded Emma's cheeks, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact. I don't know what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, dear. I'm stating facts. Victoria leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow managed to sound threatening. You're sleeping with your boss. It's written all over both of you. That's completely inappropriate. What's inappropriate? Victoria interrupted, her mask of politeness finally dropping to reveal the venom beneath. Is a little nobody from nowhere using her feminine wiles to manipulate one of London's most powerful men. What's inappropriate is watching you bat your eyelashes and play the innocent while you scheme your way to the top. Emma felt anger flare in her chest, hot and protective. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? Victoria's laugh was cold and calculating. I've been in this business for 20 years, sweetheart. I've seen your type before, pretty little gold diggers who think they can trade sexual favors for career advancement. The only difference is that you're more subtle than most. I've never... Please, you think I haven't noticed how you dress for him? How you flutter around his office like some lovesick secretary from a romance novel? How you've somehow managed to make yourself indispensable to a man who goes through assistants like tissues? Victoria stood and began pacing around Emma's desk, circling like a predator who had cornered her prey. The tragic part is that Alexander actually believes you care about him. He has no idea that you're just another opportunist looking for a meal ticket. That's not true, Emma said, her voice shaking with suppressed fury. You don't know anything about my feelings for Alexander, or his for me. Oh, but I do know men like Alexander, powerful, lonely, convinced that they're unlovable. Perfect targets for someone like you. Victoria paused directly in front of Emma's desk, leaning forward with predatory intensity. Did you plan it from the beginning? The coffee accident? The innocent act? The gradual seduction? Very well played, I must admit. Emma stood abruptly, her chair rolling backward with the force of her movement. You need to stop this right now. Or what? You'll run crying to your boyfriend? Tell him the mean lady was picking on you? Victoria's voice was mocking, cruel. Here's what's going to happen, Miss Richardson. You're going to resign from this position effective immediately. You're going to disappear from Alexander's life before you do any more damage to his reputation or this company. I'm not going anywhere. Oh, but you are. Victoria's smile was triumphant and vicious, because if you don't, I'll make sure everyone in London's financial district knows exactly what kind of woman Alexander Blackstone has been foolish enough to involve himself with. I'll spread it through every boardroom, every private club, every social gathering that matters. Emma felt ice-cold fear settle in her stomach. You can't prove anything. Darling, I don't need to prove anything. I just need to plant seeds of doubt. Whispers about the ambitious assistant who seduced her way to the top. Questions about Alexander's judgment in mixing business with pleasure. Speculation about what other services you might be providing in exchange for your position. The implications hit Emma like physical blows. Victoria wasn't just threatening her. She was threatening Alexander's professional reputation, his standing in the community that had taken years to build. Alexander would never believe. Alexander is a man in love, Victoria said dismissively. Men in love are notoriously poor judges of character. But his board of directors, his clients, his peers, they'll have questions. Uncomfortable questions that could damage business relationships, cost the company millions, destroy decades of careful reputation management. Emma sank back into her chair, the full weight of Victoria's threat settling over her like a suffocating blanket. She could weather personal attacks on her character, but the thought of her relationship with Alexander damaging his career, his company, everything he'd worked for, that was unbearable. What do you want? She asked quietly. Your resignation letter on my desk by 5 o'clock today, and a promise that you'll disappear completely from Alexander's life. No dramatic goodbyes, no explanations, no contact whatsoever. And if I refuse? Victoria's smile was coldly satisfied. Then by tomorrow morning, every influential person in London will know that Alexander Blackstone has been compromised by a scheming little gold digger who's been trading sexual favors for professional advancement. His reputation will be in tatters, and yours will be completely destroyed. With that devastating final blow, Victoria swept out of the office, leaving Emma alone with the wreckage of her happiness and the impossible choice between her own heart and Alexander's future. Emma stared at her computer screen for a long time, her mind racing through possibilities and finding no acceptable solutions. She could fight Victoria's threats, but at what cost? Even if Alexander stood by her, and she believed he would, the damage to his professional standing could be irreparable. In the cutthroat world of high finance, perception was often more important than reality. She was still sitting in stunned silence when Alexander returned from his meeting, his usual commanding presence filling the office as he swept through the door with his characteristic energy. Emma, darling, I need you to reschedule the Morrison presentation for... He stopped abruptly, taking in her pale face and obvious distress. What's wrong? Nothing, Emma said quickly, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack her face. Just tired. Long morning. Alexander studied her with those perceptive grey eyes that missed nothing. Something's happened. What is it? Really? It's nothing. How was your meeting with the Tokyo clients? Emma. Alexander moved around her desk and crouched beside her chair, the same position he'd taken during the coffee incident that had started everything. I can see that you're upset. Please tell me what's wrong. The gentle concern in his voice, the way he was looking at her with such focused attention and care, made Emma's heart break all over again. This was the man Victoria wanted to destroy, the man whose reputation could be ruined because of his feelings for her. I just need some air, Emma said, standing quickly before Alexander could see the tears threatening to spill over. I'll be back in a few minutes. Emma, wait. But she was already gathering her purse and heading for the elevator, desperate to escape, before she broke down completely and told him everything. As the elevator doors closed, Emma caught a glimpse of Alexander standing in the middle of the office, his expression shifting from concern to alarm as he realized something was seriously wrong. She had until 5 o'clock to decide whether to sacrifice her own happiness to protect the man she loved or fight for their relationship and risk destroying everything he'd worked for. It wasn't really a choice at all. Emma spent her lunch break walking through Hyde Park in the rain, her mind churning through the impossible situation Victoria had created. By the time she returned to Blackstone Industries, her hair was damp, her resolve was firm, and her heart was completely broken. She had made her choice. Alexander's career, his reputation, his life's work, all of it mattered more than her own happiness. Victoria was right about one thing. Emma was nobody from nowhere, and she had no right to jeopardize everything Alexander had built. The resignation letter took her 3 attempts to write. Each time, she started with explanations, justifications, desperate attempts to make Alexander understand why she had to leave without telling him the whole truth. But Victoria's threats echoed in her mind. No dramatic goodbyes, no explanations, no contact whatsoever. In the end, she settled for brutal simplicity. "Mr. Blackstone, please accept my resignation from my position as your personal assistant, effective immediately. I have decided to pursue other opportunities. Thank you for the experience. Emma Richardson." The words looked stark and cold on the page, nothing like the warmth and affection that had grown between them. But perhaps that was better. Perhaps it would make the break cleaner, easier for Alexander to move on. Emma sealed the letter in an envelope and placed it on Alexander's desk while he was in his 4 o'clock meeting. Then she gathered her personal belongings, a small plant Sarah had given her, a framed photo of her family, the coffee mug with "World's Best Assistant" that Alexander had given her as a joke, and tried not to think about how empty her life was going to feel without morning melodies and straightened ties and grey eyes that looked at her like she was something precious. She was putting on her coat when Alexander returned from his meeting. "Emma!" He took in the box of personal items in her hands, the envelope on his desk, and her obvious preparation to leave. "What's going on?" "I left a letter explaining everything," Emma said, not trusting herself to look at him directly. "I need to go now." "Go where?" "Emma, what are you talking about?" Alexander moved quickly to his desk and tore open the envelope, his expression shifting from confusion to shock, to something that looked like devastation as he read her brief resignation. "This is a joke," he said flatly. "You're not resigning." "I am. I've already cleared out my desk." "Why?" Alexander's voice was sharp with demand and hurt. "What happened between this morning and now? What changed?" Emma forced herself to meet his eyes, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "Nothing changed. I just realized this situation isn't working for me anymore." "What situation?" Alexander stepped closer, his grey eyes intense and searching. "Our relationship, working together, being happy." The word happy hit Emma like a physical blow, because they had been happy, ridiculously, perfectly, completely happy. And she was destroying it all to protect him from threats he didn't even know existed. "I can't do this anymore, Alexander. I'm sorry." "No." Alexander's voice carried the same authority he used in boardroom negotiations, the tone that suggested the matter was not open for discussion. "No, you don't get to just quit without an explanation. You don't get to throw away what we have with a form letter and a box of office supplies." "Alexander, please don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder than it has to be?" Alexander's laugh was bitter and angry. "Emma, 3 days ago you told me you loved me. Last week you held me through a panic attack and promised I'd never have to face anything alone again. This morning you were humming at your desk like you always do. And now you're walking away because the situation isn't working for you." Emma could see the hurt and confusion in his eyes, the way he was struggling to understand how everything had fallen apart so quickly. It would be kinder to let him think she was fickle, that her feelings had changed, than to tell him the truth and watch him try to fight a battle he couldn't win. "Sometimes people change their minds," she said quietly. "Not you." Alexander's voice was certain, almost fierce. "Not about this. Something happened. Someone said something or did something to make you think you have to leave." Emma felt panic flutter in her chest. Alexander was too perceptive, too intelligent to accept her weak explanations. "You're being paranoid." "Am I? Then look me in the eye and tell me you don't love me anymore." The challenge hung between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Emma tried to meet his gaze, tried to force the lie past her lips, but she couldn't do it. She loved Alexander Blackstone with every fibre of her being, and even to protect him, she couldn't deny it. "Can't," she whispered, "because you do love me, just like I love you." "So what happened, Emma? Who threatened you?" Before Emma could respond, Victoria Sterling's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "I see you're having difficulty with your assistant again, Alexander. They both turned to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her expression a perfect mask of professional concern that didn't quite hide the satisfaction in her eyes. "Victoria," Alexander said coldly, "this is a private conversation. Actually, I believe Miss Richardson's departure concerns the entire executive team. We'll need to discuss finding a replacement immediately." Emma watched Alexander's face change as pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. His eyes moved from Victoria's satisfied expression to Emma's obvious distress, and she could practically see him connecting the dots. "Get out," Alexander said to Victoria, his voice deadly quiet. "I beg your pardon?" "I said get out, now." Victoria's facade slipped slightly. "Alexander, I hardly think—" "Get out!" Alexander's voice exploded with such fury that Victoria actually stepped backward. "Get out of my office before I do something that will require security to escort you from the building." Victoria gathered what remained of her dignity and retreated, but not before shooting Emma a look that clearly said, "Remember our agreement." Alexander closed the door behind her and turned back to Emma, his expression now completely focused and dangerous. "What did she threaten you with?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Alexander, don't—" "What did she threaten you with?" The authority in his voice, the protective fury radiating from every line of his body, broke through Emma's resolve completely. "She said she'd spread rumors about us," Emma said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "About me using you for career advancement, trading sexual favors for my position. She said she'd destroy your reputation in the business community, cost you clients, damage the company. She said everyone would think you'd been compromised by a gold-digging secretary." Alexander went very still, his jaw tightening with such controlled rage that Emma actually stepped backward. "And you believed her?" "I believed she could do it. I believed it would hurt you. So you decided to sacrifice yourself to protect me, without consulting me, without giving me a choice in the matter." Emma nodded miserably, finally understanding how naive her plan had been. Alexander moved toward her with predatory grace, his grey eyes blazing with emotion. "Emma Richardson, you magnificent, selfless, completely impossible woman. I'm sorry. I just wanted to protect you." "I know," Alexander said, his voice softening as he reached her. "And I love you for it. But you're not going anywhere, and Victoria Sterling is about to discover what happens when someone threatens the woman I love." Before Emma could ask what he meant, Alexander was reaching for his desk phone. "Security. This is Alexander Blackstone. I need you to escort Victoria Sterling from the building immediately. No, not in an hour now, and I want her access cards deactivated before she reaches the lobby." He hung up and turned back to Emma, his expression now tender and fierce in equal measure. "As for the threats about our relationship becoming public," he said, moving to stand directly in front of her, "let me be very clear about something. I don't care who knows I'm in love with you. I don't care if every client, every board member, every gossip columnist in London knows that Emma Richardson has completely captured the heart of Alexander Blackstone. In fact, I'd prefer they know, because then there would be no doubt about where my loyalties lie." Emma felt tears spill over at the fierce protectiveness in his voice. "But your reputation—" "My reputation can handle being in love with an extraordinary woman. What it can't handle is being associated with people who think they can threaten and manipulate the person I care most about in the world." Alexander cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears with infinite gentleness. "You are not nobody from nowhere, Emma. You're the woman who makes me want to be better every single day. You're my partner, my equal, my heart. And if anyone has a problem with that, they can deal with me. What if she follows through on her threats?" Alexander's smile was sharp and completely confident. "Let her try. Victoria Sterling is about to discover that attacking you was the biggest mistake of her professional life." As if on cue, they could hear raised voices in the corridor, Victoria's indignant protests and the firm responses of security personnel. "Is she really being escorted out?" Emma asked. "She's really being escorted out, and by tomorrow she'll be unemployed with a reference so scathing that no reputable firm in London will touch her." Alexander pulled Emma into his arms, holding her tight against his chest as the sounds of Victoria's departure faded into the distance. "Promise me something," he murmured against her hair. "Anything. Promise me you'll never try to protect me by sacrificing yourself again. We're a team now, which means we face problems together. Emma looked up into his beloved face, seeing the love and determination there, and finally allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they really could weather any storm together. "I promise," she whispered, "but only if you promise me something too. Name it. Promise me you'll never let anyone make you feel like loving me is something to be ashamed of." Alexander's smile was brilliant and completely certain. "Never. Loving you is the best thing I've ever done." And as he kissed her there in his office, surrounded by the wreckage of Victoria's threats and the solid foundation of their love, Emma finally understood that some battles were worth fighting, especially when you didn't have to fight them alone. 3 weeks after Victoria Sterling's dramatic exit from Blackstone Industries, Emma discovered that being publicly acknowledged as Alexander Blackstone's girlfriend was simultaneously the most terrifying and wonderful experience of her professional life. The London financial community had indeed taken notice of their relationship, but instead of the scandal Victoria had predicted, the response was largely one of curiosity and approval. Apparently, seeing the notoriously cold CEO transformed into someone who smiled more often and actually seemed to enjoy board meetings had impressed rather than alarmed his business associates. "The Morrison account specifically requested you attend the celebration dinner," Alexander said, emerging from his office with an expression of amused pride. "Charles Morrison told me, and I quote, 'Your Miss Richardson brings a warmth to these proceedings that makes million-dollar negotiations almost pleasant.'" Emma looked up from the presentation materials she was organizing, her cheeks warming with pleasure. "He said that?" "He did, along with several other compliments about your intelligence, professionalism, and the civilizing effect you've had on me." Alexander perched on the edge of her desk, a gesture that still made her pulse quicken, even though it had become wonderfully familiar. "Though I take issue with the word civilizing, I prefer to think of it as optimizing for happiness." "Is that what I've done?" Emma asked, saving her document and turning to face him fully. "Optimized you for happiness?" "Completely," Alexander replied, his grey eyes soft with affection. "I used to think happiness was a distraction from success. Turns out it's actually a catalyst." Emma felt that familiar flutter of joy that came from seeing Alexander so relaxed and content. The change in him over the past month had been remarkable, not just with her but with everyone. He was more patient with junior staff, more collaborative in meetings, more willing to find humor in everyday frustrations. It was as if falling in love had unlocked a version of himself that had been hiding beneath years of professional armor. "Speaking of success," Emma said, gesturing toward the stack of contracts on his desk, "the Hartwell merger documents are ready for your final review, and the Tokyo office called to confirm tomorrow's conference call." "Excellent, though I have to say, discussing international mergers is much more enjoyable when I know you'll be there to translate my grumpiness into actual diplomacy." "You're not grumpy anymore," Emma observed. "Focused, yes, demanding when necessary, but not grumpy." Alexander stood and moved behind her chair, his hands settling on her shoulders, with the kind of casual intimacy that had become second nature to both of them. "That's because I'm no longer fighting a losing battle against my feelings for you." Emma leaned back into his touch, marveling at how natural this had all become. In the office they maintained professional boundaries, no inappropriate displays of affection, no letting their personal relationship interfere with business decisions. But the small gestures, the shared glances, the way Alexander's voice softened when he spoke to her, those things had become as much a part of their daily routine as morning coffee and afternoon meetings. "Alexander," Emma said, tilting her head back to look at him, "are you happy? Really, truly happy?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Why do you ask?" "Because sometimes I look at you and think this is too good to be true. That any moment now reality is going to reassert itself and remind us that office romances are complicated, and you're my boss, and You're just the woman I'm completely in love with," Alexander interrupted, his voice carrying that rough note that always made her heart race. "You're just the person who makes me laugh every day, and challenges me to be better, and somehow manages to make corporate law seem romantic when you're explaining contract clauses." Emma laughed despite herself. "I do not make contract clauses romantic. You do when you get excited about particularly well-crafted liability waivers. Your eyes light up and you gesture with your pen and you look absolutely gorgeous being brilliant. Alexander Blackstone, Are you telling me you find my professional competence attractive? I find everything about you attractive, Alexander replied without hesitation. Your competence, your kindness, your terrible habit of humming show tunes when you think no one is listening, the way you automatically straighten my tie even when it doesn't need straightening. As if to prove his point, Emma realized her hands had indeed moved to his tie, adjusting it with unconscious familiarity. I don't even realize I'm doing that anymore. I know. I love that you don't realize it. I love that taking care of me has become so instinctive that you don't even think about it. The tender admission made Emma's chest feel tight with emotion. Is that what I do? Take care of you? Every day, in 100 small ways that make me wonder how I ever functioned without you. Alexander's hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, his thumbs stroking gently across her cheekbones. Emma Richardson, you have completely ruined me for any other woman. Good, Emma replied, rising from her chair to stand within the circle of his arms. Because you've completely ruined me for any other man. Also good, Alexander murmured, leaning down to press a soft kiss to her forehead. Because I have no intention of letting any other man near you. Possessive much, Emma teased, though she secretly loved the protective note in his voice. Completely possessive, utterly territorial, embarrassingly devoted. Alexander's smile was self-aware and unashamed. Ask anyone in the building. They'll tell you that Alexander Blackstone has been thoroughly domesticated by his assistant. Former assistant, Emma corrected. Current girlfriend and newly promoted executive coordinator. The promotion had been Alexander's idea, a way to eliminate any question about Emma's qualifications while giving her the authority and salary that reflected her actual contributions to the company. It also meant she no longer reported directly to him, which had solved any lingering concerns about professional impropriety. Current love of my life, Alexander corrected gently. Future, well, we'll see about the future. Something in his tone made Emma look at him more closely. There was a nervous energy about him, a barely contained excitement that reminded her of the way he'd acted before their first date. Alexander, she said carefully, what's going on? You have that look again. What look? The look you get when you're planning something. Usually something that involves spreadsheets or strategic planning or... Emma stopped as a thought occurred to her. Oh no, please tell me you haven't made a spreadsheet about our relationship. Alexander's guilty expression told her everything she needed to know. Alexander, you didn't. It was a very small spreadsheet, he said defensively. More of a timeline, really. With projected milestones and optimal timing for various relationship developments. Emma stared at him in delighted disbelief. Show me. Absolutely not. Show me right now, or I'm going to assume it contains something truly embarrassing. Alexander sighed with the resignation of a man who knew when he was beaten. He moved to his computer and pulled up a document that was, indeed, a relationship spreadsheet complete with dates, milestones, and what appeared to be statistical projections. Oh my God, Emma breathed, scanning the document over his shoulder. You have our first kiss scheduled for optimal romantic impact. You've calculated the ideal frequency for dinner dates. Is that a cost-benefit analysis of weekend getaways? In my defense, I approach this relationship the same way I approach all important projects, with thorough research and strategic planning. Emma studied the spreadsheet more carefully, noting the careful thought that had gone into every entry, the way he'd tried to balance her needs with his own, the obvious care he'd taken in planning their future together. What's this entry for 3 months from now? She asked, pointing to a cell that simply said, Major Milestone Discussion. Alexander's cheeks actually colored. That's, classified. Classified how? Classified as something we'll discuss when the optimal timing window opens. Emma felt her heart begin to race as she realized what he might be planning. Alexander, don't ask me about it, he said quickly. I'm already nervous enough about the timing without having to defend my methodology. Your methodology for what? For making sure I don't mess up the most important thing that's ever happened to me. The simple, honest admission made Emma's throat tight with emotion. Here was this incredibly powerful, successful man treating their relationship with the same careful attention he gave to billion-dollar mergers because it mattered that much to him. You're not going to mess anything up, she said softly, turning in his arms to face him fully. Do you know why? Why? Because you love me enough to make spreadsheets about our optimal happiness levels. Because you care enough to worry about timing and methodology and romantic impact. Emma reached up to cup his face, her thumbs stroking along his strong jawline. Because you're you, and I'm completely, utterly, ridiculously in love with you. Alexander's smile was brilliant and relieved. Even with the spreadsheets? Especially with the spreadsheets. Though I do think some things might be better left to spontaneous romantic inspiration. Such as? Emma rose on her tiptoes, bringing her lips close to his ear. Such as the fact that I don't need 3 more months to know that whatever major milestone you're planning, my answer is going to be yes. Alexander pulled back to look at her, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. Emma? Yes, Alexander. Whatever you're planning, whatever you want to ask me, whatever timeline you've calculated for maximum romantic impact, yes. Alexander's laugh was pure joy, and when he kissed her, Emma realized that some moments were worth all the spreadsheets and careful planning in the world, especially when they led to this kind of happiness. 6 months after a clumsy collision in a boardroom changed both their lives forever, Emma Richardson found herself standing in Alexander Blackstone's penthouse apartment, holding a bottle of champagne and wondering how she'd become brave enough to make the decision that had brought her here. "You're sure about this?" Alexander asked for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, his hands gentle but slightly trembling as they settled on her waist. "Because we can wait. We can wait as long as you need." Emma set the champagne on his kitchen counter and turned to face the man who had somehow become her entire world. 3 days earlier, Alexander had officially proposed, not according to his carefully planned timeline, but in a moment of spontaneous panic when a client had made a casual comment about Emma being quite the catch. And Alexander had realized he couldn't bear the thought of anyone else even thinking about catching her. The proposal itself had been perfectly Alexander: meticulously planned backup location, his office, carefully selected ring, a vintage emerald that perfectly matched her eyes, and a speech that had somehow managed to be both romantically eloquent and adorably nervous. Emma had said yes before he'd finished the first sentence, which had apparently completely derailed his prepared remarks and resulted in him kissing her senseless against his desk while the ring box lay forgotten on the floor. Now, with their engagement barely 3 days old and the ring still feeling foreign and wonderful on her finger, Emma had made a decision that felt both inevitable and thrilling. "I'm sure," she said, reaching up to straighten his tie with the gesture that had become their private ritual. "I'm sure about you, about us, about wanting to start our life together properly." Alexander's grey eyes searched her face with the kind of intense focus he usually reserved for important business decisions. "This isn't about proving anything to anyone, is it? About Victoria's threats or office gossip or—" "Alexander," Emma interrupted gently, "this is about the fact that I've been in love with you for months. We're engaged to be married, and I want to share every part of my life with you, including this part. Even though I'll probably be terribly nervous and overthink everything." Emma smiled at his endearing honesty. "Especially because of that. Do you know why? Why? Because even when you're nervous, you're still the most considerate, attentive man I've ever met. Because you'll put my comfort before your own pleasure. Because you'll make this special and beautiful and perfect, just like you make everything else in my life." Alexander's breath caught at her words, and Emma could see the last of his uncertainty melting away, replaced by something warm and intense and utterly devoted. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I love you so much it still surprises me sometimes." "Good," Emma replied, rising on her tiptoes to kiss him softly, "because I plan on surprising you with how much I love you for the rest of our lives." What followed was a night of discoveries that exceeded every romantic fantasy Emma had ever harbored. Alexander approached their lovemaking with the same focused attention he brought to everything important in his life, but tempered with a tenderness that made Emma feel precious and cherished and absolutely adored. He took his time learning what made her sigh, what made her gasp, what made her say his name like a prayer. His hands mapped every curve of her body with reverent attention, his lips following the paths his fingers had traced, until Emma felt like she was dissolving under the weight of sensation and emotion. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her skin, his voice filled with such honest wonder that Emma felt tears prick her eyes. So incredibly beautiful. When they finally came together, it was with a connection that felt both physical and spiritual, as if they were claiming each other not just with their bodies, but with their souls. Alexander's eyes never left her face, watching every expression of pleasure with the kind of focused devotion that made Emma feel like the most precious thing in his world. Afterward, they lay tangled together in his enormous bed, Emma's head on Alexander's chest, his fingers stroking gently through her hair as they both struggled to process the magnitude of what they'd just shared. "That was," Emma began, then trailed off, unable to find words adequate to describe the experience. "Perfect," Alexander finished softly. "Absolutely perfect. I was going to say life-changing, but perfect works too." Alexander's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. "Both accurate, though I have to admit, my spreadsheet didn't adequately account for the emotional impact." Emma propped herself up on her elbow to look at him, noting the way his dark hair was thoroughly mussed, and his usually controlled expression was completely relaxed and satisfied. "You have a spreadsheet for this too?" "Of course I do. Optimal timing, romantic atmosphere, post-intimacy emotional management strategies." "Post-intimacy emotional management strategies," Emma repeated with growing amusement. "Please tell me you're joking. I wanted to make sure I didn't say anything stupid in the immediate aftermath that might diminish the experience for you." Emma stared at him for a moment, then burst into laughter that was equal parts love and disbelief. "Alexander Blackstone, you are the most wonderfully ridiculous man I've ever met." "Is that good or bad?" "It's perfect," Emma said, leaning down to kiss him thoroughly. "It's absolutely perfect. Though for the record, your post-intimacy emotional management is fine just the way it is." "Really? Really? In fact, I think you can throw away that particular spreadsheet." "Are you sure? I put a lot of research into it." "I'm sure. From now on, I want all our intimate moments to be completely spontaneous and unplanned." Alexander's smile was soft and mischievous. "All of them?" "Well," Emma conceded, "maybe you can keep the spreadsheet about optimal breakfast in bed timing. That one might actually be useful." "I don't have a spreadsheet about breakfast in bed timing." "You don't?" "No. Should I make one?" Emma considered this seriously. "Actually, yes, but only if it includes detailed analysis of the best morning-after activities." "Such as?" "Such as this," Emma said, settling more comfortably against his side. "Lying here talking nonsense and being ridiculously happy, and planning our future together." "Our future," Alexander repeated, his voice filled with contentment. I liked the sound of that. They spent the rest of the morning doing exactly what Emma had suggested, talking about their plans, their hopes, their dreams, for the life they would build together. Alexander told her about the house he wanted to buy, somewhere with a garden, where Emma could have her morning coffee, and a library where they could read together on quiet evenings. Emma shared her dreams of traveling together, of seeing Alexander's rare, unguarded smile in places far from London's corporate pressures. When they finally emerged from the bedroom, it was to find the champagne they'd never opened and a message on Alexander's phone from his mother, who had apparently heard about their engagement from the society pages and wanted to meet Emma immediately. "Your mother reads the society pages?" Emma asked, wrapping Alexander's shirt around herself like a robe. "My mother reads everything. She's going to love you, by the way." "How can you be so sure?" Alexander pulled Emma into his arms, his expression serious and full of love. "Because you make me happy. Because you laugh at my terrible spreadsheet obsession instead of finding it annoying. Because you hum in the mornings and fix my ties and somehow manage to make every day better than the one before it." "Those are all very good reasons," Emma agreed solemnly. "And because," Alexander continued, his voice dropping to that intimate tone that always made her pulse quicken, "anyone who meets you can see that you're extraordinary, kind, brilliant, funny, beautiful, everything I never knew I was looking for, but exactly what I needed." Emma felt tears threaten again, the good kind that came from overwhelming happiness rather than sadness. "I love you, Alexander Blackstone. Spreadsheets and all. And I love you, Emma Richardson. Soon to be Emma Blackstone." "That has a nice ring to it." "It has a perfect ring to it," Alexander corrected, spinning her around his kitchen until she was laughing and dizzy and completely certain that this moment, this man, this ridiculous and wonderful love story they'd accidentally created was exactly what happiness looked like. Outside, London carried on with its usual chaos and ambition, but inside Alexander's penthouse, two people who had found something extraordinary in the most ordinary of circumstances were planning a future that promised to be anything but boring. After all, when you fall in love with someone who makes spreadsheets about optimal romantic timing and hums show tunes while organizing files, ordinary was never really an option. And as Emma looked at the ring on her finger, their engagement ring, their promise, their beginning, she realized that sometimes the best love stories started with spilled coffee and ended with forever. Leave your comment and share this story with someone special. It truly helps us keep bringing new stories to you, and if you want to follow every chapter of this emotional journey, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. Your support makes all the difference.